The Matrix Deciphered. This is a book written by Robert Duncan, the Saint. It is nonfiction and original research. Also see his vital new book Project Soul Catcher Vol 2 at Amazon. Monday, November 8, 2010. The Matrix Deciphered. Bio of author. True nobility is exempt from fear. King Henry VI, Part 2, Act 4, Scene I. Call me the Saint. I am the All-American, prep school, Harvard College graduating with honors in computer science and a minor in pre-medical studies, and advanced degrees from Harvard and Dartmouth in business and science. My famous ancestors are President Lincoln, King Duncan of Scotland, and Governor William Bradford, the first governor of Massachusetts. My research interests have been neural networks, virtual reality, and EEG-controlled robotics. Before graduate school I worked for the Department of Defense, Navy, NATO, and various intelligence agencies' computer science projects. I have done business consulting and computer consulting for the largest companies in the world. I have been a professor, inventor, artist, and writer. I am one of the last Renaissance men. My projects have included algorithms for Echelon and CIA natural language parsing and classification of document content, IRS formula for red flagging audits, writing the artificial intelligence code to automate tracking of the Soviet nuclear submarine fleet and all-water vessels, work integrating HARP with SIGINT SIGCOM and SPA-WAR. I have worked on projects for the Justice Department connecting local, state, and federal databases for the tracking of terrorists. I developed a system for the FBI to track license plates past toll booths and other locations. I worked on the Soldier 2000 program to create body networks for reading vital signs and other information. A system I worked on called Sniper is operational in Iraq which triangulates on intercity conflict gunshots. I have been to a couple secret bases in the so-called free world. I have developed telemedicine, robotic surgery and virtual reality applications for the Army. For DARPA, I have worked on satellite computer vision target tracking applications and tank simulation as well as integration of the land, sea, and air surveillance systems like SOSUS, towed arrays, and others. Projects that I have worked on outside of government contracts include my thesis on computer-generated holography, a project making paralyzed people walk again using choreographed stimulated muscles movements, face recognition, voice identification and recognition, fingerprint recognition, and neural network robotic controller. My research interests move to enhanced reality heads-up displays and wearable computing systems. My current research involves finding a cure for the mind control directed energy weapons fiasco. The integrated global surveillance grid is actually part of the holy grail of weapons and human control systems. My apologies to the human race for my contribution to tyranny. I was tricked into thinking it would not be misused by corrupt government, especially in my beloved country. I was wrong. The Joint Non-Lethal Weapons Directorate has skipped green on the governing board. One of my old colleagues at a technology think tank in Cambridge, partly in charge of the radio frequency weapons testing for neurological disruption, now torturing and killing people worldwide. Several other the United States Navy and UK Navy scientists have been knocked off, and that is why I have come forward. I know my time may be near. I am currently a professor in computer science and business, helping to educate the public on government corruption, greed, and stupidity. Like my ancestor Lincoln, I am fighting against mental slavery in a new civil war engineered by the same useless elements in over 80 government agencies who have tested radiological, drug, and viral weapons on unsuspecting Americans for over 45 years. I have great pride in the fundamental and constitutional values of America and mean no disrespect by my blasting the incompetence, apathy, and stupidity of those involved in the conspiracy of involuntary biological, chemical, and psychotronic human effects testing. There are so many brave men and women serving in the armed forces who fight and protect us for the American values they believe in. But because of the silos of information called compartmentalization in the security agencies and the lack of accountability and oversight of black operations and some top-secret projects, diabolical elements become rogue or worse, destroying the very country they are tasked with protecting, turning it into a hypocrisy rather than a democracy. My goal is to awaken Americans to the continued horrific acts of military and CIA weapons testers in this country and the other branches of government's inability to stop them and hold them accountable. All I ask from the reader is to listen to testimony and validate facts presented here and come to their own conclusion. Then fight to win back America from this silent overthrow. This has been my project for about 2 years, investigating government corruption, incompetence, and cover-up, upon which I accidentally stumbled one day while looking at a reverse MRI scheme to inject electromagnetic signals into the brain for virtual reality applications. I have interviewed over 200 people and worked on the highest level of military projects for the United States, NATO, and UK, and have given videotape testimony to senators and representatives on this topic, resulting in lip service since they have no real power to enforce. 2 high-level FBI agents and a couple CIA agents have come forward to validate the existence of a MKUltra-like project that continues to grab random people for mind control experimentation. 2 of these have since become part of the program and endure daily psychotronic tortures. All the torture can be done using directed energy psychotronic weapons with the so-called Continental Ballistic Missile Surveillance Defense Grids. I apologize to the human race for any contribution to these 4th-generation weapons that I may have worked on that are more horrific than the nuclear bomb and whose cover-up is more pervasive than the Manhattan Project. And because of the horrific acts of violence being committed on as many as 2,000 Americans as far as my research has uncovered, and many others in other countries, I understand the extreme risk to my own welfare that publishing this material will have. But freedom is so important to me that I know full-heartedly that the human race must have an open discussion on these weapons to decide their own fate before the point of decision is gone, that I am willing to risk divulging so-called national secrets. All I offer you is the truth. All information presented in this book was received through legitimate channels such as the Freedom of Information Act, military documents, victim testimony, and turned agents. I still hold valid the oath I took to keep secret the details of the projects that I worked on under DOD budgets. The majority of the proceeds of this book will go towards helping the psychotronic experiment survivors and surviving families of those that have perished. When the government fails, business and the citizens must look out for each other. Remember, all I offer you is the truth. Morpheus, The Matrix. Preface. My motivation for writing this book was to help consolidate the technical information about the most advanced, secret military weapons being tested on civilians throughout the world, and to give new test victims a literary reference that they can give to police officers, psychiatrists, and family members so that they can be quickly educated on what is happening them. When the person is menticized with drugs and electromagnetics, it is extremely difficult for that person to articulate the complex politics and devious cover-up being used on them without sounding crazy. After reading this book, the only excuse people of the community have for continuing to disbelieve the victim is their own ignorance and inability to cope with the shame of being American. I will sound extreme in my writings. It is the intention of the government experiments to be as violent and harsh as possible to victims to make them sound crazy when they describe the events. I thought about toning it down to be more believable, but it wouldn't have been the truth. This needs to be part of the historical records for future generations to learn the failings of our own. We should have been more vigilant. The tactics used by the CIA/DOD, Department of Defense, for massive human experimentation has not changed in 35 years. Acting like a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde allows them cover and plausible denial while they cower back into the fringe and shadows of government. If they made the experiments mild, people would be more likely to believe the DOD/CIA conducted this kind of torture research. Congress is impotent to stop it, although they have tried many times in the last couple decades. So as a fact of life, we must cope with the reality of the loss of control of our government and fight to spread the truth through word of mouth and other yet to be controlled information channels. Ignorance is the only enemy, and everyone working to keep secrets or spread disinformation are merely the unimportant pawns to be sacrificed in this classic metaphorical battle between good and evil. I titled this book The Matrix Deciphered because I was inspired by the movie series The Matrix, which was a clear and very accurate metaphor for what is occurring to people. Morpheus says in the movie, "Nobody can tell you what the Matrix is, you have to see it for yourself. You do not want to see the Matrix for yourself." I will do my best in the following pages, to unravel the metaphor and boldly explain exactly what the Matrix is. You will quickly realize how the complexity of the games of power, control, and disinformation strategies have evolved in the last half-century. A certain level of skillfulness and much time is needed for the average person to parse through the vast amounts of material necessary to consolidate it all to a few understandable truths. The only way we can win this informational civil war is by educating a certain percentage of the population who will understand the technology and believe the thousands of witnesses. Only then will government finally stop torturing and killing citizens with these directed energy weapons and apologize for their indiscretions. Then a new dawn for mankind will come of age that promises to unify the peoples of the world, eliminate pain, and possibly allow us to cheat death. It is the last war that will ever be fought. But the stakes are very high. It is our souls, our freedom of thought and expression, our uniqueness and individuality that will be lost forever if we fail. Introduction. The American Delusion: A Dream and a Nightmare. We are raised on lies and practiced self-delusion. We ask, do these pants make me look fat? And we dread the response, no, it's the fat that makes you look fat. The pants make you look colored. We teach others to lie to us. We believe what makes us feel good and rationalize away those facts that don't. We are in the land of deception. The average person tells 2.5 lies a day. As a social experiment, try counting the number of exaggerations and flat-out lies you encounter in a day by people, advertising, and watching the news. Assuming you are worldly and wise enough to disentangle the word games, you will be shocked. For some, the dream state is pleasant. Sheltered from the misery of the world, given a continuous false stream of hope, and led to believe that they are part of something good, righteous, and moral, many live in an ignorant, myopically focused bliss. For others who adventure too far with truth and knowledge, they will find the roads not traveled to be scary with factual realizations. A mind once stretched, cannot regain its original shape. Be forewarned, you cannot be put back into the matrix, that is the American delusion. I used to pose this philosophical question to peers. If there was a virtual reality machine that seemed real in every way and you could determine what your perfect life would be in advance, would you agree to live in it for the remainder of your physical existence, assuming your memory could be erased that you chose to do it? Your answer is quite revealing about the base motives that drive your everyday living. If you answer, no, it isn't real, my life would be meaningless, then you are the type of person who is driven through creating meaning in your life and define your value through your relationships with other people. If you answer, yes, of course, who wouldn't want a perfect life? Then you are a pleasure seeker and define the reason for existence is to optimize your quantitative happiness through your chronological lifespan. The question is not just a philosophical one anymore. But like in the movie, Vanilla Sky, things could go wrong. I always answered the question as such, I would absolutely do it if I could be assured that the illusion had a 100% chance of success. Since nothing is 100% certain, I choose not to because the letdown would be too great if the program didn't take. There is no such thing as the perfect illusion, especially for the critical eye and mind. The American delusion is just such a virtual reality machine, designed of carefully constructed, psychologically sanctioned thoughts with a wireless high-tech twist. You will probably choose to close a blind eye and hope for the best as much of the world has. But you will always ask yourself the same old questions, isn't there something more? What is the meaning? The question is, of course, ill-posed. The question should be, what is meaning? To answer this question, you must let down your guard, eliminate your ego, and let go of all that owns you for a moment. The journey to the truth of our existence is an emotionally rocky one. You will find yourself elated at times, and depressed at other times. When you understand, there will be no emotions at all, just acceptance of it. For this expedition, we will set sail aboard the ship of science. It is a framework of logic and method that has served mankind well since its inception. As your captain on this expedition, I will navigate and guide us while traversing the numerous languages of studies and meld their different vantage points into a single model of reality. The vast sea of human knowledge is separated by barriers of jargon. Once removed, sailing the ocean of understanding is far smoother and direct. All aboard. Prepare for rough seas. First we head to the land of lies. The psychology of deception we will find. Expect to encounter a known beast that has only one large eye. Fight valiantly and blind the Cyclops. You must always keep your guard up. Wield your weapons of critical reasoning, skepticism, and logic gallantly and you will defeat the monsters in our journey. Expect the unexpected. We will encounter Medusa in our crossing into the synapse. Be forewarned, this journey is a treacherous one. Hypnotic spells that will turn you to stone chanted by witches unseen, and the sirens of forbidden knowledge will lure us close to our death. But fear not, Apollo the son of Zeus, the god of truth and of light, smiles upon our journey for he too is in confrontation with Mars and Ares, the gods of war. The truth is not always what you expect to find. During our journey to the land of deception, we must dig deep and follow Alice's white rabbit down the rabbit hole. Time and space will no longer be flat, and proportions and logic will seem to conflict. The Mad Hatter is not to be trusted for directions. He is confused on purpose to mislead us in the maze of lies. And if that isn't enough of an adventure for you, the Scarecrow, the Tin Man, and the Lion too cross our paths many times. They were not blessed with a brain, heart, or courage by the wizard behind the current of secrecy. In these failings of creatures, we can triangulate on what we want to be. There is no turning back, we are in search of the promised land. Metaphors and analogy are not to be taken literally. They are direction signs in the crossroads to understanding. Beware of false signs, the little gremlins from the Kremlin and Pentagon, put them up to mislead you. You will in time recognize their signature and be able to distinguish the true path from strategic misdirection. Follow the radar light, political power and defense industry greed, and you will find the trolls that are operatives of the American delusion. We need to cross the Valley of Death, in the beautiful country of California, to see the secret weapons development that is there. If I were ruler, I would take California and its people away from the hindrances to cultural progress, and set up a separate land with a new breed of enlightened and civilized people. But nay, it can't happen because of an ever gluttonous growing federal giant leech that covets his power and likes to consume his cattle grazing there. Why must we face these beasts of deception? For they are part of the journey of understanding the hobgoblins of little minds who created the matrix of deception. History and background. E.g. cyber hive minds. In order for us to proceed in our understanding of a revolutionizing technology and its capabilities as a weapon, we need to define some concepts and vocabulary. EEG stands for electroencephalogram. It is a representation of the brain's electrical activity. Traditionally, electroencephalograms are gathered through probes placed all around the head. They measure minute electrical differences from each other that are representative of the brain's activity near the probe. A brain map can be inferred from these voltage sensors. EKGs, electrocardiograms, work in exactly the same way to measure the electrical waves from the heart. MEG stands for magnetoencephalogram and similarly measure the magnetic fields created from ion flows in the brain. They have different trade-offs in terms of measuring and locating brain activity. A functional MRI is an active scanning technique used to also measure brain activity in real time as well as its structure. MRI stands for magnetic resonance imaging. It uses magnetic resonance to create photons that are representative of the types of atoms and bonding states they are in. Another sister technology is called ESR, electron spin resonance. I have not seen any hospitals which make use of this technique by creating images from electron spin resonance. Electromagnetic waves are created by a perturbation to electric or magnetic fields that carry information about the states of angular momentum. There are many more brain imaging technologies, but these are the traditional ones. Using probes to collect brain information has limitations beyond just the lack of mobility from the tethered wires attached to the user. It collects electrical information the best at the surface of the brain but not deep into it. That is why so many probes need to be attached to the head in order to get a more refined picture of activity. I have been studying the human mind for a good portion of my life, from neuroscience, to cognitive modeling, to artificial intelligence. Here is secret number 1 that has been suppressed by the forces of ignorance in the government. There was a patent that I will keep referring to throughout this book because of the importance of the work. It is published in the appendix. In 1974, Robert Malek, an employee of Dorn and Margolin Incorporated, a major defense subcontractor in radar design now owned by Edo Corporation, an even larger all-defense contractor in electronic warfare, invented a fairly simple radar device that could read whole brain electrical activity at a large distance. It has the major advantages of no wires and full brain electrical activity analysis, not just points on the skull surface. He discovered and perfected a way to use some simple electromagnetic oscillations anywhere from 100 MHz to 40 GHz to read brainwaves by illuminating the brain and its electrical conductance, then reading the return signal. The imaging method observes the changes of frequency resonances, amplitude, and phase which represent the states of neuron depolarization throughout the brain. Secret number 2. But more profoundly, he discovered that he could influence brain waves if precisely timed with a return training signal. He had no idea that at this moment in history, he had accidentally destroyed democracy as we envision it to be. The military and surveillance community immediately picked up on the patent and within 2 years had reprogrammed their communications and surveillance satellites and terrestrial phased arrays with the new concepts. The rapid deployment of this technology occurred because it only required software changes in already existing radar, imaging, and communications terrestrial dishes and satellites. Many additional spy satellites have been launched since to bolster the system. So in 1976, on the bicentennial of this great nation, a system called TAMI was born. TAMI is an acronym for Thought Amplifier and Mind Interface. A more invasive Big Brother technology came about before George Orwell's prediction of 1984. Secret number 3. Stealth radar techniques were first recorded by observing the Russian bombardment of the United States Embassy in Moscow with microwaves. Using high-powered steered phased arrays and focused directed energy from two sources next to each other, one can create a nearly undetectable scalar wave, or destructive interference at the point of interest. With just a minor energy interaction, the interfering beams bounce back with strong signal-to-noise ratio to be resolved at the sources again. This allows for any imaging technique to be done from extremely large distances. In effect, it makes distance irrelevant to the detection feature, be it radar, MRI, or ESR imaging. At the same time, the Russians had discovered and were developing similar capabilities. This accelerated the secret arms race that continues to this day. The research and capabilities have come a long way in the last 30 years. Even if one didn't have direct access to the knowledge of surveillance capabilities, one could project out in time 30 years knowing technology developments increase at an exponential rate. At that time the military demonstrated the capability of reading automobile license plates from satellite images. In order to cover up and not draw attention to mind-reading radar, the whole field of psychic phenomena and paranormal psychology was invented to deceive the civilian populations of what was occurring. The Russians showed their hand when they started bombarding the United States Embassy in Moscow with microwaves in the late 60s, and then with the 7 Russian woodpecker transmitters that began operation in 1976 pointed at the United States. Unfortunately, due to the nature of this new weapon, many human minds are needed to create the database of specific brain data necessary to increase the effectiveness on a larger and larger population. These are referred to as the cataloging and cloning operations. In this context, cloning does not refer to human cloning, but EEG cloning. Many have misunderstood this fact and then it was popularized by the TV series X-Files. These cloning operations are what plague the human race today as every country feels the need to have this weapon that requires torturing and killing many people of their own populations to develop. EEG cloning means to copy someone else's brainwaves onto another person. The discovery made by Robert Malak allows this to be done wirelessly anywhere in the world. A new military division emerged called the Psychic Warfare Unit, initially stationed in the Pentagon, but most likely it was rolled into the Psychological Operations, Electronic Warfare, and Informational Warfare units. Initially this became a great intelligence gathering tool. Psychically spying into other people's minds was an incredible feat. I don't use the term EEG cloning much because it refers only to the special case of observing a target's mind. That is only one aspect of the technology. Malak discovered he could influence brain waves just as easily as reading them. So at the other extreme, a psychic warrior can EEG clone his brainwaves onto a target. This is symbolized in the movie The Matrix, where the agents take over random citizens' bodies while in pursuit of the heroes. The correct terminology to describe everything in between the two extremes is EEG heterodyning. Heterodyning is an engineering term which means to mix signals. So EEG cloning is just a special case of EEG heterodyning. EEG cyber hive mind is another term used for EEG heterodyning for non-weapons use experiments. These are collectives of people who share one common set of brain waves. They jokingly refer to the process of forcing someone into a collective as Borging them, a reference to the evil cyborg civilization from Star Trek. They are studying both the long-term effects of being in this kind of collective mind configuration and how to use it to control, spy through, disable, or kill a target. They also are studying communication and organization without spy gadgets of any kind for synchronized missions. The emerging field which intersects at the physics of psychology is called psychophysics. The dynamics of the mind are well described from neuroscience reductionism. Artificial neural networks have been around for over half a century. But the new challenge is to map exactly the subjective experiences of consciousness to the physics of organic intelligence's informational signal processing, including biochemical and electromagnetic. The word psychophysics has additional connotations that are quite appropriate in the way that this field has evolved in the secret labs around the world. The tools of psychophysicists are called psychotronics. It is this area of research that has given rise to all the conspiracy theories on the New World Order, psychoterrorists, secret societies' involvement, mind control, and satanic cults. Mind control weapons are the holy grail of the ultimate weapon and has given birth to the world's most notorious, sociopathic scientists, which in turn have spawned a generation of the most intense human suffering for weapons testing efficacy the people of this planet have ever endured. The first documented use of mind-reading radar. In order to reduce the effects from the bombardment of the United States Embassy in Moscow with microwaves, they put up microwave screens on the windows of the building. Oddly enough, this actually had the opposite effect of increasing the microwave intensity inside. The only way this can happen is if interferometry was being used on the embassy. If you block a path of the interfering/heterodyning wave fronts, you can lessen the destructive interference pattern, thereby increasing the measurable energy. This was the first documented use of so-called scalar weapons. Lured by the sirens of truth. True nobility is exempt from fear. King Henry VI, Part 2, Act 4, Scene I. My story. Some people will feel that it is an appropriate irony that the worldwide surveillance and obviously integrated psychotronic directed energy systems should be used on me, since I ignorantly participated in building cogs for the subsystems of the machine, like the Jews who dug their own graves in the Nazi Holocaust. But I assure you that I am not alone. Indeed, most scientists and engineers working on DOD projects have no idea how the pieces ultimately fit together and how the system as a whole will be misused. Welcome to hell. Two people on different days walked by me and said, "You are going to have a psychotic break. You are a psychopath." The first time it happened, I assumed the person was talking on a cell phone and I didn't see the headset. I was happy, relaxed, and doing what I love to do: invent, socialize, write, and learn. Life was good. On October 31, 2004, Halloween, the spooks came out. I felt a little strange after waking up from a nap and feeling groggy, which didn't go away for the entire day. The synthetic telepathy began. As clear as a cell phone call, I was talking aloud and one main speaker with 3 other people on the other end of the conversation would reply. Rather than being frightened, I thought someone like my neighbors were pranking me using a technology called ultrasonic heterodyning, not very well known in the United States except as a weapon made by American Technology Corporation, but used in vending machines in Japan. They had a program like Candid Camera, that used this technology to make people think they were crazy and used it for other gags. It projects sound so that only one person can hear it at large distances. It was very fascinating for me to get a demonstration of the technology, I thought. It was Halloween and they introduced themselves as a satanic ritual abuse cult. I wasn't really very familiar with cults, but I assumed that could be scary. When I didn't seem to react to that cover story, they went on to try several others. "We are the Borg and we are assimilating your uniqueness," a man proclaimed in a confident voice. "Whatever," was my rebellious, disinterested reply, even though I was actually quite interested in the technology demonstration. "I am God." Pause. "Would you believe I am the angel of death?" The conversation continued. "No." "Okay. We are evil aliens and this is an alien abduction," they less assuredly claimed. I thought to myself without speaking, wow, they really should have rehearsed this prank before trying it on me. How about this? We are brain nappers? You are food for thought. The conversation became more belligerent and repetitive. The only relief I got was putting mineral oil in my ears and plugging them with wax. However, it continued for 9 full days, and that's when the torture began. Imagine every pain you have ever felt and many you haven't being repeatedly played into your mind like MP3 files for 12 seemingly unending months. All the time, the narrators describe in detail what kind of pain you are feeling and psychologically abusing and tormenting you the best they can. After being run through the battery of torture tests, I can confirm that what one of the researchers involved with mind control brags about in his paper is true. I can control every aspect of human mental function at 450 MHz. These tortures and experiments easily stole 35 years of my life or more. Colonels involved with the EEG heterodyning weapon claim they have demonstrated its lethality many times. I have since identified many people they have killed in this way. I developed quite a rapport with the mind control weapons testers. Our conversations became more half-hearted and honest. Agents asked, "Can you get close to the president? Would you kill him for us? We just have to get you to say that aloud to people to make them think you are insane and dangerous. We usually can get people locked up in an insane wing at a hospital by the first month or commit a crime through their bodies. We need you to discredit yourself. Do you have any ideas?" My reply: "I don't think you need to do anything. The technology is too unbelievable for most to comprehend, and your brutality on so many citizens will be enough for the majority of people to be skeptical and tune out. Agents, can't you just tell people that the Russians, Chinese or the FBI is behind it? I reply, what else do you have to choose from? Agents, those are the only scripts we've been trained on. We are big powerful psychic warriors and you should fear us and do what we say. If you kill your father we will let you go. You've got to commit some crime to discredit your testimony. We need blackmail, something. Nobody is as perfect as you. Who are you, fucking Jesus? I prophetically declare, no, I'm not even religious, but if I can perform 3 miracles, expose your long history of crimes against humanity, find defenses against the weapon, and help usher in a new scientific era, I would be a saint. An eye is upon you. Freemason symbolism. The Total Integrated Global Surveillance Network. How do the ionospheric heaters such as those based in Alaska, Puerto Rico, Colorado, and Brazil image the Earth in astronomically small detail? From now on I will call the ionospheric heaters, ground-based imaging and directed energy systems. Once again the devil of destruction, Dodd, has purposefully misnamed these systems to mislead the public and Congress as to their real uses and intentions. By using the concave mirror effect of the reflection off the Earth's upper atmosphere, these giant phased arrays can see the smallest energy anywhere within their purview and direct the energy back the same way. These directed energy phased array systems are often many miles wide. Imagine what one would see if the sky were a giant mirror. It would amplify points on Earth like a cosmetic mirror does for your face. Now add another lens, like a telescope, and you can see even more microscopic elements. And like what had to be done to fix the Hubble telescope with a misshapen lens, the imperfections of the atmosphere can be compensated for to get a clearer picture. Directing energy to a spot on Earth would be like focusing a magnifying glass on an ant to burn it with the sun's energy. The people look like ants to these dishonorable insignificant men playing God at a distance. Insert picture of mirror in the sky. To instinctively get a sense of what one would see if they had an eyeball as big as the HAARP array and could see electromagnetic waves in the HF through UHF range, let's look up at the ionospheric mirror. We can see almost 3/4 of the way around the world in any direction, and because of our huge eye and the magnifying effect of the mirror, we can see microscopic properties only limited in spatial resolution by the highest frequency that we can see, but only limited in the energy resolution by the sensitivity and noise filtering algorithms. If there was a person at the point of observation looking back through a telescope, assuming that visible light reflected off the ionosphere, he would see a giant eye looking back at him. So this ionospheric mirror is very important to the death machine. Finding ways to shake, distort, heat, ripple or disrupt it so they can't continue operating the virtual hell they have built, would be a good goal for the humans. Show ray tracing image of sky as mirroring Earth. The ionosphere starts at 50 kilometers and extends to 650 kilometers above the Earth. There are several layers and each layer has plasma or ionized air that reflect and refract the signals from a vertically pointed radar known as an ionosonde, also a major part of the so-called ionospheric heaters. The angle of refraction and total internal reflection depends on the wavelength of the electromagnetic wave and its angle of incidence to the layers of the ionosphere. Show map of range of known directed energy field arrays and power levels based on total internal reflection and overlap of other directed energy fields at different common radar wavelengths. Resolving power of the ground to ionosphere to ground telescopes, aka directed energy and Earth imaging systems. Put formula for resolving power based on size of phased array field lens and wavelength, then add the magnification factor from the concavity of the Earth's atmosphere. Electron spin resonance, ESR. This is the secret sauce that the conspiracy kills to keep secret. Notice that there are no ESR machines in hospitals. Why? Because it would become immediately obvious how easy it is to read body electricity from radar, that is brain waves at a distance. The basic concept is simple and very analogous to the way magnetic resonance imaging works. It works on manipulating spin and gyro frequency of electrons. Picture of out-of-sync electron frequencies and synchronized gyro frequency. If only 5% of the country were smartest enough to understand this basic physics, we wouldn't be so easily manipulated by the disinformation agents that say brain waves can't be read by radar imaging fields or that neurotransmitter release can't be modulated by timed electromagnetic fields. If the people of this country want to be free again, they need only to understand these simple physical truths, and that shall set them free from the alien psychological and psychotronic enslavement. It isn't an accident that the United States is at the bottom of the first world countries in terms of math and science education. Electron spin polarity resonance, EPR. In this imaging technique, the spin polarity is measured by flipping it, which adds or subtracts energy from the system. Energy must be conserved, so a photon is given off if it goes to a lower energy spin state. It is heated during the movement to a higher energy state, prepping it for a synchronized transition back to a lower energy state. The body's electricity is modulated into delayed state transitions because of the local electric field variations. This return signal is processed and the very high signal-to-noise EEG patterns are extracted. The sensitivity is truly science fiction-like. Even a single nerve or neuron firing can be picked up individually. This gives new meaning to signal intelligence. Magnetic resonance imaging, MRI. Very similar to the way magnetic imaging works with the spin of the nuclei of atoms with their magnetic moments. Picture of MRI: synchronized nuclei rotations need E and B fields. Traditional radar bounce imaging. Scalar or interferometric stealth radar. So in order that academics and commercial industries don't accidentally discover how much surveillance the militia does on them, and so that the energy from radar does less damage to human tissues and the environment, the clever and unintuitive concept of doubling the power to the area under surveillance was born as stealth radar. If two or more beams such as pulses from the Alaskan and Puerto Rican imagers converge on an area in the continental United States, the beams would either double in intensity, constructive interference, or cancel completely, destructive interference, depending if the waves were 0 degrees or 180 degrees out of phase from one another. The beams or wave fronts bounce off the area under surveillance undetectable by an observer at the point of interest. The wave fronts don't just stop, they continue from their reflected and scattered trajectories to be collected by any type of sensor once the wave fronts have moved out of each other's canceling beams, which exists as a scalar field or slangily termed gravity waves. In addition, the scatter stealth radar would make it appear like free energy was coming from nowhere due to the microscopic differences in scattering angles. This is the so-called psychic energy that seems to emanate from people. This is what powers Colonel Thomas Bearden's so-called free energy machines. The free energy machines are just harnessing the power of the destructive fringe of the powerful stealth scatter radars. Colonel Bearden claimed a 75-watt free energy device. I heard that there was 30 watts of scatter field energy from a human body. That's pretty close. What he is actually building is a scalar or gravity wave detector. Interesting how he funded this research through a company that claims other mechanisms of action. Is this considered black budget funding? I wonder what his investors think. Diagram of scatter energy and beam cancelling fields. Millimeter wave, infrared and visible wavelength satellite imaging. This topic is self-explanatory. Everyone has seen the incredible detailed infrared imaging capabilities of the military. They can see heat signatures through walls. What do haunted houses, ghosts, alien abductions, and the Bermuda Triangle have in common? Remember how the air becomes electrified before a haunting by the appearance of a poltergeist in movies inspired by this weapons testing on the public? We've busted our ghost in the machine. Remember how planes would be downed in the Bermuda Triangle because their compass needles and instruments would go haywire? Those were directed energy attacks from the Puerto Rico radar field built in 1959. Remember all the shows about cars stalling and radio stations flipping right before an alien abduction scenario? These are all the same radar tricks but with varying degrees of lethality. These tricks are all done by the same technology and the usual criminals in the bowls of the beast. Who gave the chimps the gun? Who are the chimps' handlers? They are the high traders and should be hung according to the law of the land for training the chimps to attack their own country and provoke wars around the world. The cost in terms of human misery for maintaining such a large killing machine is far too great. Just so insecure, frightened Americans can delude themselves into safety. See the section on the probability of being killed by the United States machine versus foreign governments, terrorists, sharks, or lightning. The war machine that is supposed to make people safe is statistically their biggest threat. Ignorance may be bliss, but what you don't know can hurt you. Van Eck hacking. Hacking the human brain. Computer hackers are always finding ways to zombify as many machines as they can. This means that they find a way to hack into your system and install remote control software of some sort. The military's programs, called Zombie IV, were similar in goal. They wanted to be able to hack into people's minds and create remote-controlled zombies. They succeeded over 30 years ago and the technology is now close to perfected. There is a stalking phenomenon occurring in America and around the world. Read Terrorist Stalking in America for another perspective. There are 3 kinds of stalkers, one of which have been released by the Freedom of Information Act documents that describe government stalking programs, or goon squads as they are called in slang. CIA and other agencies training their employees for intimidation tactics abroad and in the United States are one form of the members of terrorist stalking gangs. The CIA has used these tactics to help overthrow governments and intimidate leaders of other countries many times in history. The second purpose is to play into society's programming that people who think government agents are following them are crazy. Discrediting an individual through mudslinging, blackmail, or erratic behavior has been a high priority documented skill for these agencies. The other two types of stalkers are more dopes and victims of zombification. The global system, TAMI, can hone in on a compatible mind and instantly be able to manipulate it to some varying degree dependent upon many factors. The offense practices their trade by influencing people near a targeted individual to convey information only pertinent to them, for spy games. These people are everyday citizens unfamiliar with this high technology. The effects are so subtle without lots of training to detect, nobody would be the wiser. They would at most just question why they did that or felt the need to say that. The third category of stalkers is the most disturbing. True zombies are created through the voice of God microwave hearing effects. Some people become complete believers that God is talking to them and telling them what to do, be it follow someone or kill on command. John Lennon's killer claimed voices kept saying do it over and over again. TAMI came online in 1976, and John Lennon was killed in 1980. The culture around those people in the United States that are stalked, tortured, intimidated, or harassed by federal agencies can be funny at times. The stalkers that are practicing their childish cloak and dagger games, targeted individuals call zombieloids, a new the United States agent slur derived from the secret zombie programs and mongoloid, since the term spook has been overused. Monitoring of life signs and psychic Star Wars defenses. So almost every human is monitored and tracked by various integrated technologies. One justification for TAMI is that a global system to monitor everyone is necessary to alert the military in case of a psychic war and protect the leaders from electromagnetic influence. But of course in reality it is used for the exact opposite purpose. Uniqueness of heartbeat and breathing patterns, list patents. Other Star Wars directed energy weapons plans. I have seen plans for electromagnetic railguns for launching projectiles in space at other satellites. They use superconducting high-powered magnets to accelerate projectiles faster than bullets. Imaging the brain and other Earth objects. From my protected sources I have seen brain images derived from the TAMI system. I was not told how they were produced, but I can reverse engineer some possibilities given what I know about surveillance capabilities. Using cognitive modeling techniques, one could construct a PET or functional MRI-like image showing brain activity simply using the phase, amplitude, and frequency information from mind-reading radar. A spectral image could be constructed based on models of brain function and an electron spin resonance topographical head map. Since the brain activity is precisely known, it could be rendered and displayed in a 3D image. Other methods might include using submillimeter or terahertz wavelength radar or Earth-Gauss MRI/ESR techniques. Incredible that this can all be done with a constellation of spy satellites or ground-based phased arrays. In medicine, one technique is called computed tomography or CAT scan, which use X-rays to obtain image data from different angles around the body and then uses computer processing of the information to show a cross-section of body tissues and organs. X-rays are not used for obvious health reasons by the equivalent radar imaging, but any or all wavelengths under the visible spectrum can be used to obtain a very good image of a person. The infamous HARP phased array that stretches across Alaska is capable of Earth-penetrating tomography. Pictures of my soul's container. I have a friend who is a radiologist. He stuck me in an MRI machine to produce a screensaver while he was doing rounds before we went out drinking. I think I got a clean bill of health because after reviewing the MRI slices he comments, "I am astonished at how unremarkable your brain is." My response, "Don't judge a mind by its container. Please take time to review the appendix." There is a document on imaging meteors the size of baseballs with the Puerto Rico phased array radar grid using scatter radar and ion spectra absorption, called the head echo effect. You'll understand the relevance. The United States Embassy in Moscow. So here is what the United States learned from the Russian bombardment of the United States Embassy with microwaves in Moscow after many years. By heterodyning two powerful beams of microwaves where one beam mostly cancels out the effect of the other at the location of interest, you will have a near-scalar radar beam almost undetectable because of the low-intensity readings. The low-intensity microwaves still interact with the environment and bounce back to their origination. The original beams were very high intensity. So what this does is creates a method of amplifying the signal-to-noise ratio. It allows high-powered signals to bounce off surfaces with a minimal reaction to objects. At the receivers, it can then be amplified with a clean signal. This is the secret to mind-reading radar. A typical directed energy haunting. The arrows represent the exact points in the audio frequency domain where a target always hears the beginning of a phoneme of a syllable of a word. This is a pitch, EAC, analysis of the white noise of a scanner during a severe voice-to-skull attack on a victim. Disclaimer: it is illegal to modify scanners to view military frequencies. All scanners are disabled in certain frequency ranges for national security reasons. So we used body resonance frequencies just above the military bands when collecting our data. Okay. God forbid that people have a right to defend themselves to see what energy frequencies are being used to attack and kill them. Although difficult to see in this shrunken image, the target can hear the same speech each and every time the sound is played. At the arrows, the government torture victim hears the syllables of the words. Everyone else hears pure noise. The word syllables and cadence that the target hears can be viewed in the broadband energy spectrum, however to the naked ear it can't be heard. Some energy changes are picked up by the simple power spectrum audio analysis. Here is the same white noise at a different scale in the power spectrum with edge detection applied. The rectangular areas are where the victim hears syllables of words again. Highlights include what look like 10 bands and formant voice patterns. This is the amplitude phase encoding of the noise, another method mentioned by both the Stocklin patent and Malik patent. It appears amplitude and pulse frequency modulated. Listen to the noise. You can't hear these features. If this is the deterministic broadband noise encoding plus the electromagnetic head resonance technology of the CIA for word choice, it is indeed cleverly hidden and specific to individuals. Observe the lower frequency broadband energy jumps that can't be heard if you have an equalizer on your MP3 player. While the audio analysis is inconclusive without high-end military-grade digital oscilloscopes and the expertise to reverse engineer the CIA word choice technology, other basic tests were more than obvious. During the attacks, the entire scanner spectrum up to 850 MHz became this white noise and no other signals could be picked up. The target's body electricity when measured by several voltmeters went from 10 MV to over 0.3 V. Compass needles deflected by 20 degrees from magnetic north and the video camera microchip sensor, CCD charge-coupled device, became ionized and all the video became overly bright and color distorted. I did not have wireless EEG equipment at the time of these tests, but the neurological effects on a targeted individual again were beyond doubt. The directed energy hauntings are pretty common now and I quit following the United States military random attacks on people until I acquire the appropriate equipment to do the more sophisticated signal processing. Methods of encrypted signaling. The single gigahertz pulse through wall radar can be extended as a very covert method of messaging to a specific location. Using geographically dispersed transceivers, a signal stream can be encrypted, broken up and then divvied out to the broadcasting stations, via satellites or ground-based. The message is secured by both being encrypted and fragmented on their way to each station. The stations each broadcast with precise timing so that the pulses arrive in the correct order at only one triangulated point. Interception of the stream anywhere else will render the encrypted stream garbled and the bits out of order. I'll leave it as an exercise for the cryptologist at the top universities to devise an algorithm for deciphering one of these interceptions. You can imagine that precise psychotronic signal injection in conjunction with ultra-wideband, frequency hopping or deterministic broadband noise could be done in a similar manner to create a low probability of interception and detection method. Poetry of shame. Porter Goss, you disappoint us all. You have the power to stop this with just one call. You shame Hotchkiss and the public with your lies. Torture is a common practice covered up with bizarre suicides. You were entrusted with power, but failed many of us in the last hour. Biocommunication and world control. Once again, I must question why the so-called Eastern Bloc countries are more forthcoming with their research than the United States and even NATO-aligned countries. The United States government has hindered civilian research in this area tremendously through their active disinformation noise campaigns. Imagine how much material gets first filtered by the communist countries, then the CIA, and finally we have to overcome the barriers of language to get this. Why is there more information coming in from outside the so-called free world than internally? The answer is obvious for those who have seen the matrix of deception from both sides of the country's split personality. So this is a theory that is incredibly disturbing that crossed my path since becoming fairly well known as a researcher in this area. Often I get anonymously sent information from other saints which I examine with a skeptical mind due to the countless disinformation agents out there. But this deserves to be told. A machine for every man, woman, and child. Now that sounds like the thinking of a machine to me. Morpheus, the Matrix series. For this book I oversimplify some of the concepts so that it can reach more people. I preface this complex idea with the notice that it is still being simplified for general consumption. Bioelectric field modulation could well be the mode of one type of interaction of these directed energy weapons. This is what is studied most amongst the New Age group and the psychics of yesteryear, as well as what comes out of the Eastern Bloc. We know that informational coherent neuron modulation will connect with any brain. Both magnetic and electric fields in the most basic form interact with neuron communication, but the reason we don't go into convulsions from all the electromagnetic signals that our bodies absorb is that they are not significant in terms of the repetitive time series cognitive pathways, i.e. brain entrainments. There is a precise opportunity for amplification and thereby modulate and piggyback brain signals with another external signal. Your informational pattern and cognitive model is nothing like any signal you would absorb from radio stations or electrical appliances. One must exactly get the train of pulses correct in order to influence the outcome significantly and amplify the effects. Growing virtual neurons. This is one method to usurp a mind and create a higher order mind network. Let's look at Medusa's head again in the dendrites of the neuron. Assuming one could wirelessly measure some property that was representative of the state of that neuron, one could grow virtual neurons connected to it. Since many methods of neurotransmitter modulation are researched along with raw electric or magnetic current induction methods, influencing the voltage at the hillock of a neuron can be done. With just those two sets of tools, one can grow virtual neurons to every human brain. Cyberneticists working on the concept of a global brain have no clue that it has already been done to some extent and completely wirelessly. They all focus on neural chips and plug-in brain links. Furthering this idea to its logical end, one could create a higher order mind from connecting all human minds together, a global brain. Has it been done? I know for certain that many people have been mapped and connected to the United States Mind Network. Whether that is just for current and future use as spy and control conduits, or whether this large collection of minds has been or is being integrated is unknown to me. Certainly hive minds with 2 to 6 people are being created and tested in the thousands of cells. Whether those cells are somehow connected to each other through a collective hive mind switchboard is also unknown. The virtual neurons can be of a self-organizing type, example another human brain or computed neurons. Or they could be non-adapting virtual neurons used to force new thought processes and program thought pathways, neural programming. The possibilities are mind-blowing. You can see how even men of strong character would eventually become corrupted by this power. Once the target brain unbeknownst to them has adapted and incorporated the virtual network, i.e. the modulated brain signals, anything can be done with their soul. Like in the movie The Matrix, if you pull the plug on their brain link before they escape to an exit, they would lose their mind, figuratively and literally. Similarly, the new self-organized configuration is reliant on the virtual neurons. If the signal suddenly stopped, the organic brain would take some time to readapt to its new configuration. Minds, magnetically integrated neuron duplicator, function might be to literally duplicate a target brain through a copycat parallel artificial neural network. Over time the artificial network should accurately cognitively model the target's cognition. Because the model is artificial and computed, it can be run in fast forward and thereby predict probable next states with a set of confidence levels, speech and reactions for example, before the target's brain has achieved those states. Victims of the psychotronic research call this one form of demonstrated thought reading. Uneducated or conspiratorial psychologists call this thought sonorization. Thoughts being finished and spoken back to the target before they barely begin or are fully aware of their own thought. Let's imagine if everyone has their own artificial mind model running all the time. A program composed of synaptic weighted matrices constantly growing with the person, basically a soul duplicate of pure information. Occasionally, a person's mind will separate in its program evolution from the actual human mind's evolution due to any number of events, profound new experiences, psychoactive drugs, brain accident. Perhaps this is what triggers an alert for the monitor of minds to send in the psychic assassins to kill or disable the person who is no longer on the mind network and might be considered a threat unchecked and unmonitored. If the artificial cognitive model becomes way out of sync with the actual person, the person needs to be incapacitated so that the knowledge of the matrix of deception isn't spread and doesn't pull others out of the American delusion. I'm just having fun speculating here. My aliens began the synthetic telepathy conversation with the statement, "You hurt your mind. You lost your mind." Those low-life aliens love their head games. Another way to estimate how many people might be on the mind network is to look at the rate of tinnitus in the population. How many people hear a very high-pitched square wave tinny sound once in a while? I scoured the medical research in this area and none of it satisfactorily explains the neurological and biophysical processes that give rise to this kind of tinnitus as described by government torture projects and the general populace. Tinnitus affects 17% of the general population. 17% of the United States population is 50 million people. The United States Mind Control Network is rumored as of 1985 to be able to handle 25 million people. In fact, when the cases of tinnitus that have real physical causes are removed from those stats, it matches exactly. With a potential influence over 25 million people, all public opinions and elections could easily be manipulated. In fact, until we regain constitutional controls over this integrated weapons system, no public servant, politician, or military leader should be allowed to serve if they suffer from any sporadic or constant tinnitus as described. This is why a civil war will occur and not a revolution. Potentially 8% of the population cannot be woken up from their slumber and will continue to power the military machine. A neurally linked person on the mind network becomes reliant on the extra energy that amplifies their neural circuits. The person's brain chemistry adapts to this extra energy through biological processes. It is similar to how a person becomes tolerated to psychoactive drugs or poisons. So other than tinnitus and the side effects of an overexcited brain for a couple years, if a person was brain napped later in life and didn't grow up with a brain amplification signal, one would never notice their soul, their informational essence, was being held in a vast array of supercomputers in an underground military facility. This religious metaphor runs throughout many military programs. From the nuclear submarine named Trident, the weapon of the god Neptune, to the NASA rocket Apollo, to the acronym for the space-based weapons, GODS, Global Orbiting Destruction Systems. So if you believe in the soul, you have a duty to free your soul twin being held captive by these supercomputers and potentially tortured in a simulation for eternity or until the power is shut off. Selective memory erasure and thought filters. In the movie Sunshine of the Spotless Mind, a reference to Aldous Huxley's work, people could remove selective memories of old lovers if they were too painful. The CIA program EDM, Electronic Dissolution of Memories, has this capability. If your mind is duplicated with an external signal, for argument's sake let's say, half of the signal is due to your brain's electrochemical processes and the other half is the mind cognitive model simulation of your brain that should be nearly perfectly in sync all the time. By forcing memory recalls of the memories to be erased, EDM can track the neural circuits, mathematically represented by matrices in the cognitive model, and turn them off. This could be done by an active filtering recognition system of the brain patterns. If the person begins to recall a filtered memory or have a non-government sanctioned thought, then the filter dampens that mental process in the mind model. Since half of the signal that your brain adapted to is dependent on the external mind model running in sync, your brain pathways won't have the energy necessary to further induct neural groups to reach full consciousness. Another way to put it is that thoughts acts like they have a momentum and inertia. Take away some of the momentum and the thought can't get over the next hill. Sisyphus was condemned to repeatedly push a rock uphill for eternity because he revealed the designs of the gods to mortals. This is nice metaphor as to how thoughts are dampened and can't reach awareness. People on the mind network are condemned to not becoming fully aware without the energy and momentum necessary to repeatedly push the thought over the top of the potential energy hill. For example, how the United States shadow government has killed more people by keeping this technology secret than all the previous United States wars since the beginning of this nation. Let's look at how EDM can be used for smoking cessation. Let's forget about hypnosis, neuro-linguistic programming, and aversion therapy techniques for this thought experiment. Rather than using amplified self-destructive behaviors for silent assassinations, smoking urges can be dampened or filtered just like a memory or thought pattern in the mind model. The Russians have successfully applied similar techniques. Bullet time research into enhanced human performance. You move like the agents. Trinity to Neo, the Matrix. What happens once your cognitive model is in silicon form? Your simulation can be run at any speed. Subjective consciousness occurs due to the state changes in your brain. Computational equivalence implies it matters not that your function is run on silicon or a giant billiards game, as long as the output always has the same information content and functional equivalence. Psychophysics states that it must give rise to the same subjective consciousness. It is your soul twin. However, your silicon soul twin can be run at any speed. In fast forward, at the speed of light rather than at 200 miles per hour axon depolarization velocity, the world around you will practically stand still. If you are bored, turn it down and time will literally fly by. See the section on silicon immortality. The CIA Ultra research into improving memory is still being investigated. See Appendix for CIA and Inspector General documents. Add virtual neurons and amplifying brainwaves along with creating a dominant alpha brainwave state improves learning and memory. Recall is quicker too. One interesting property being explored is the hive mind collective intelligence configurations. Certain aspects of the combined heterodyne mind are faster and others are slower. Word choice can be greatly enhanced for speaking and writing as well as degraded. The search and solution space for problem solving and decision making is broader and sometimes converges on a solution faster when the shared mind works well together. More interesting and practical for the military is the increase of physical reaction speed. Not only can machines respond to precognitive thoughts for fractions of a second quicker reaction times, but those predicted precognitive amplified thoughts can be amplified back into the same person and amplify those cognitive pathways faster than they usually would, thereby decreasing the time for the lightly grouped neural patterns to become full awareness and then converted to action. This would improve someone's hand-to-hand combat skills significantly. Stupid alien tricks, voodoo dolls. If this story isn't bizarre enough for you, it gets even funnier. Earlier I facetiously joked that the psychic warfare unit in the Pentagon during the 1970s was probably located next to the voodoo doll warfare unit. It actually is in the same unit whose war room is nicknamed Hell. All involuntary human psychotronic weapons research projects report hot needles in flesh in various parts of their bodies as a type of practiced torture. These aliens turn themselves into voodoo dolls. They poke themselves with a dull needle, but the amplified feeling for the clone target is perceived much more painfully. Of course they could have designed a computer program with a human body model, voodoo doll, and select a point to poke, burn, tickle, punch, cool, etc. You can see how funny these scenes will be in the movie. More Hollywood movies inspired by the psychic warfare unit. Men in Black is about a secret government agency that watches aliens on the planet. They had a scene with monitors that showed 24-hour surveillance of all the aliens who looked human. The psychic war room monitors countless people's EEG patterns and translates it into audible and visual digital information that can be viewed on a monitor. The agents in the movie read the tabloids to get the real news. There is an interesting parallel to the truth once again. Tabloids will report on alien abductions. You now know how to translate and read between the lines. Alien abductions are the directed energy nervous system modulation experiments that the mainstream media is forbidden to touch. EDM, electronic dissolution of memory. I have been pointing out how many horror movies have been inspired by these electronic mind control experiments that have been taking place in ever-increasing numbers in the United States and abroad. The movie, The Forgotten, is a clear example of one particular CIA/DOD program that was not discontinued after Congress's church investigations. EDM is an experiment on erasure of memory. In the movie The Forgotten, several children were abducted and their parents were forced to forget about them. Of course, the age-old mythology of evil aliens as an explanation who is conducting these 30-plus-year-old technology experiments was the focus of the movie. People's ignorance and desire to believe the fantasy of aliens or demons still works today to redirect the anger that the public should have against the high treason that has become acceptable for weapons testing on the public at large. The Nazi scientists that were brought over after World War II infected our country's military and security agencies, thinking that testing on all humans and not just Jews is acceptable as long as there is plausible denial. It is now commonplace. Electronic dissolution of memory is achieved by several mechanisms. First, let's examine the EEG heterodyning option. When two minds are linked through TAMI, every thought is shared. The psychic attacker merely needs to blank their mind when a topic of thought occurs that they want to avoid. The blanking of their mind forces the memory recall of the target's mind to be blocked also. Thought redirection also works. Memories are just inductions of brain entrainments. If the subject is not trained in psychic defenses, their thoughts will blank also. This is only a temporary mechanism and does not affect long-term memory. A more severe method is used to erase long-term memory. What is nicknamed the deep fryer uses an overstimulation of memory creation to degrade those recalls. Neural network theory predicts that large training sets of data or experiences will exponentially decay earlier memories stored in the neural networks. So electronic neuron amplification technology was discovered to have this capability by accident. But of course, everything get weaponized and marketed into a project for budgeting. The third method of EDM uses hypnosis and signal coherence changes to erase short-term memory. Along with severe trauma and psychological abuse, these methods are used to try to get a victim to repress and forget their experiences from the experimentation of electronic mind mapping, influence and control for obvious reasons. As with testing and experiments, there is a probability that they won't work on certain minds and personality types. This is what they are interested in and documenting for weapons efficacy. Hypnosis and suggestion to forget with traditional vocal channels has been successfully demonstrated since Freud's day. Signal coherence is a relatively new concept. Your brain has natural operating frequencies. If altered, the information is stored in your vast neural network under those new conditions. This is called state-dependent memory. It is observable as people who take psychoactive drugs or alcoholics. Memories stored under those mental conditions can only be recalled under the same conditions. Hypnosis has been demonstrated to recall memories under the same condition. Planted CIA paid psychologists popularized this phenomena as false memory recall. Many children have been subjected to these brutal Coulter experiments back in the 70s, and when the memories began to resurface, many pseudoscientists of disinformation called them false recalls. Defense lawyers of child molesting priests also latched onto this concept for their defense. Memory probing. One of the more useful aspects of this technology is the ability to probe memories. The EEG heterodyning practice attackers play the same game with all victims. They are able through two techniques to walk the victims back in time to think that they have been linked to the victim since birth. Since the capabilities of remote neural stimulation are nearly identical to electrical probes in the brain, a random neural stimulation will trigger memories. This is not used for targeted memory recall, but rather for finding and recording memory anchors for further investigation. Those memories are used through synthetic telepathy conversations to make the target remember other connected events. Of course, direct vocal interrogation techniques can achieve the same results. Over time, this process is effective to get a complete profile of a person's life. Another tangential method used in connection with interrogations is an injected guilt signal. This forces memory recalls in conjunction with a specific memory anchor. So if you feel guilty about some particular memory, those additional memories will surface. And the last method used in these psychic games is more incredible. While the databases storing mental activity are impressive, they still don't have the ability to record every human's brain activity continuously for later parsing. They instead sample activity in time and save it. They only have clips of a particular mind, throughout their life, stored for later review. This cuts down on the 1.4 terabytes per second collective human geopsyche throughput that would be required. 1.4 terabytes x 31,536,000 seconds in a year equals 44,150 petabytes per year. The capabilities of computer storage will reach that soon enough for DOD budgets. So reviewing a particular target's brainwave clips allows them to appear like they have been with the subject of experiment for their entire life through demonstration of knowledge of earlier events. This brings up the topic of criminal law. Think about how we could perfectly convict crimes against other people. In the movie Minority Report, their society is able to prevent all premeditated violence. Only crimes of passion continue to be unstoppable. What a shame our government keeps this technology secret for pathetic military and spy uses. Secret Psychotronic Mind Prisons. Poem of Secret Psychotronic Mind Prisons. I am drowning in the sea of lies, plausible denial of bizarre suicides. The cowards that currently rule, kick me in the head like mule. What greater good is there than truth, triangulate on it with longitude and azimuth. Whilst I dread in my mental jail, I'll tell you my tale. It begins in the DOD archives. About a mind control tool. Discovered in my youth. While drinking a pint of ale. Secret psychotronic concentration camps. Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall make you free. Bible, John 8:32. It is also on the CIA plaque outside Langley. What is it like to be in a mind-controlled prison? Here is one form it takes through neuronal amplification technology. Your strange attractors of thought become like black holes with their pull, and before you can even realize, you are stuck in the ruts of some else's thoughts. Errors, fears, pain, and speculations are amplified to their extreme. It is dysfunctional and not the way evolution intended it. Truly the most dishonorable, pathetic, and grotesque weapon ever conceived by the minds of the monsters on the CIA payroll. Be ashamed, be very ashamed. Your tax dollars were used to deceive you. For others it is a journey into madness, but for the majority of people it is just a hypnotic, apathetic haze. This technology allows for personalized hells for people to suffer in their own private purgatory. What is the Achilles heel of worldwide mind control, torture, and silent assassinations? I believe we can shoot these fake gods in their antennas. Poisson space and knock out the communication systems that house the killing signals. Superconductors, I believe, are the shields we must develop against their irresponsibly and traitorously directed beams of death. And of course, if we can remove the spell that Hypnos has put the American people under, we can awaken the great sleeping giant to join our battle. Comic relief. To take another break from the serious and dark issues that we face, let's look at some amusing situations where the technology could be useful. Imagine you are Cyrano de Bergerac, a chivalric duelist with a comically long nose, and you wish to woo some young lassie but haven't the game or smooth words from which to court. You could EEG heterodyne with a smooth talker and let them say the words she wishes to hear from your mouth. It is true, this can be done today. And in return for the favor, you allow the smooth talker to share in the prize, simply by extending his invitation to EEG clone your experience of making passionate love to your new bride.
Hypnotic entrainment pulses. What many victims report and I experience myself is a 3.2 Hz pulsing phaser-like sound. Visit www.drrobertduncan.com to hear the sounds of psychotronic weapons. Here is a sample recorded from my equipment during the heaviest targeting. This is what I hear in my head. There are several pulsed frequencies that are heard by victims, but many can only perceive a constant synthetic Taos hum named after a town in New Mexico where the citizens suddenly got nosebleeds and heard a tinnitus while the military was testing radio frequency weapons on it. I reconstructed many of the waveforms to exactly duplicate the energy signals being perceived as auditory stimuli and was able to capture others with scanner equipment. But the most prominent one is the 3.2 Hz continuous Star Trek-like phaser warbling sound. It exactly correlates with a slight flashing perception in the visual cortex. So one hears the phaser sound as loud as a 90 dB speaker system with a stroboscopic visual effect in synchrony while in a completely silent room. There is also a 10 Hz information pulse train in connection with the visual cortex. This has been more difficult to elucidate. It seems to be the brain bandwidth of the mental impressions per second. It appears to have a sliding window in a continuous stream of cognitive messaging necessary to force synchronized brain entrainments and amplify particular neural pathways. You can think of this like a Matrix movie where only mental frames need to be presented in order to walk a brain through a perception of continuity both for visual images and pulsed audiograms. Now, when the phaser-like sounds of psychotronics, EEG heterodyning, are heard, the synaptic modulation impulses are out of sync with the target's brainwaves. Also, when the voice modulation is not heard by the victims, the other sensory controls are diminished. But when one does not hear the tinnitus-like sounds, they are strongly connected with the global human surveillance grid and perfectly aligned with their program. Here is a sample of my EEG spectral energy. Note the power in the 3 Hz line that is with me in sleep and wake states. EEG power spectrum sample. This phenomenon is likely due to Dr. Lin's, University of Chicago, description of the microwave hearing effect. That is, there is a thermoelastic expansion of brain tissue that reaches the inner ear and stimulates nerves or hairs in the cochlea. Perhaps there is another mechanism that causes audio perception of the absorbed energy misaligned with firing brain pathways. Failed binaural integration of acoustic heterodyning perceived interpretation of two signals would cause a similar phenomenon. Diagram here to explain binaural beating and acoustic heterodyning. Integration of stereo sound into the difference between the frequencies at the base of the brain. Put a sample on the website for visitors to use headphones to hear. To get a visual understanding of how pulsed audiograms or mental impressions work, tear out this encoded page. Go to the website www.thematrixdeciphered.com to grab the frame image. Print the frame image out on a transparency. Slowly slide the pulsed, phase-encoded visual message behind the grid. Your brain will make sense of it and even perceive continuous motion. Insert the phase-encoded pulsed message with a bouncing dot below it, key Vindicent Ibit, the Avenger will come or the United States flag transforming into the constitutional flag. Stupid aliens tricks. We just zapped you from the Star Wars space lasers. Did you feel that? my mentally impaired militant moron says. I feel a couple bee stings on my neck and arm. Okay. We actually just pulled a couple hairs out, but it felt like it, didn't it? The sounds of psychotronics. The walls of the mind prisons have a tinnitus and melodic-like sound to them. Most victims who are part of the denial of service attack hacking of human minds genera of experiments hear either an unbelievably loud ringing often melodic, or they hear the voice communications from the neural link, aka synthetic telepathy. When the signal is out of sync with your brain waves, the tinnitus-like sounds are heard. If you can imagine back when you were in school taking a test and someone is grinding their pencil while sharpening it, or a jackhammer is heard outside the window, you say the noise is so loud that you can't even think straight. That is exactly what electromagnetic imprisonment is like. The tinnitus or microwave hearing effect is so loud that you can't think straight. When you don't hear it, you know that that same power level is now influencing your thoughts. You can hear the handlers, or mind prison guards, as clearly as a cell phone call. This is the synthetic telepathy that the CIA has been working on for decades. Thousands are enslaved under the United States program and tortured daily for the continued Ngutla research program that never ends despite how often Congress asks them to stop. Just like with torturing Iraqis and denying it, they just outsource the programs to subcontractors or create a new secret agency with new titles to creatively bypass the intention of laws. Criminals run the government now. They spy on us despite the many laws to stop that. They conduct psychological and information warfare and call it propaganda. They try to assassinate foreign leaders with these weapons despite clear laws that prevent it. Bush can't even recite the Constitution or the Bill of Rights, which demonstrates what depravity and a devolutionary period we are in politically. To hear the very synthetic sounds of psychotronic concentration camps, visit www.thematrixdeciphered.com. World Politics and Conquest. The psychotronic concentration camps are no small operation. It is being done on people throughout the world and not just in the United States. The invisible torture without physical scarring is purposefully creating growing anger and resentment towards the United States and allies around the world. Manchurian candidates are created with these methods developed out of the CIA Ngultra program. What is their strategy and reason for doing this? I don't pretend to understand all the complexities of world politics and need for power and domination, but these aggressive actions and attacks by the United States on the world's population must have the purpose of creating the impression and fear that terrorism is everywhere. Perhaps it is further justification for military expansion in a new world order. Perhaps it is the way the military is creating the atmosphere where these neuron-influencing weapons will be acceptable as stated in some of their documents. Perhaps it is to justify further loss of freedom and more domestic surveillance, ushering in a fascist state more quickly. Self-attacks and the purposeful creation of resentment is not a new scandal. The United States has done this for decades with plenty of success. People are simply incapable of asking the difficult questions and linking cause and effect. These mind-control directed energy weapons were used on Saddam in 1992 according to a quote from USA Today newspaper. I can't imagine that this had anything to do with the United States having to go back to a very expensive war years later, I say with extreme sarcasm. Yet, no one believes the scale of which these weapons are being used on people around this country and others. There are 70 victims in the UK that have come forward. I have contacts with nervous system weapons test victims from China, Taiwan, Russia, Australia, Germany, Sweden, Finland, Canada, Mexico, and the list goes on. They need to make sure the weapons work on every culture of every language, so they need to actually torture and try to cover up their weapons tests by killing the victims. Pretty incredible, isn't it? Our perceptions of self as a country is completely skewed with irrational patriotism when judged by our malevolent actions in the world. The game has become more sophisticated. These rogue government agencies are using a third party, sometimes unbeknownst to them, to commit the self-attacks. This indirection is enough for most Americans not to believe it is occurring. It is the age-old method of misdirecting anger at the wrong groups. The warlords in the United States want some action. Why is the media too cowardly to cover this important topic? Why won't they dig deep? Are the science and politics too complicated for them to put in a news bite? Is it too scary for people to cope with? Is it something that doesn't make us feel good, so we will simply choose not to believe it? We are fully asleep as a population, having an American dream and delusion. Tax laws and terrorism, another humor break. Just to see how complete the cover-up is on this topic and map out the entire maze of lies while I chased the white rabbit, I humorously tested a tax law that was passed to help victims of terrorism. Even though psychoterrorism is defined in several well-published military documents as the act of hacking the human mind, the IRS does not acknowledge the United States-sponsored acts of terrorism, especially, if the damage is caused indirectly through brain incapacitation or the acts committed using one's own body. Terrorism has to be of unknown origin, of direct physical consequence, and acknowledged by the President. The marketing of this word terrorism is very good. So victims who are still alive in the United States, don't expect any compensation or tax breaks anytime soon under this regime. Sometimes, I do enjoy explaining these complex technologies to the mind-numbingly droned cogs of the machine just to see their reaction. Hypnotube programming. So here is another part of the game for the human torture and death lottery to make sure the criminal element's weapons are working properly. We created this country to escape religious persecution. We are free to believe what we want and to worship any god. How unfortunate and unconstitutional it is that people who believe that government agents are stalking them and that directed energy weapons are being used on them rather than believing God or Satan is talking to them are thrown in the jail's psyche ward if they seek help from ignorant local authorities, even though there is voluminous documentation on this subject. Over 25% of the weapons test victims I interviewed experienced ignorant authorities programmed, uneducated consequences. Even the CIA agents say the cops always get in the way. They end up being a nuisance for both the humans and evil aliens. We have even lost the right to believe and express the truth in this democracy without severe repercussions. It has been a long, gradually, silent overthrow. Nobody noticed because it was done ever so slowly over many decades. Had the Constitution been nullified in 1 year using these dirty tricks, people would have been up in arms. The human effects weapons testing industry figured out the mass psychology in order to go unnoticed. It turns out that if they torture, experiment, and then kill the subjects over a long period and do it in small enough numbers, no one will care, especially if their death comes in the form of common illnesses or accidents. This is also true of loss of freedoms, increasing taxes, bloating government, and ever-increasing complexity of laws. Slowly evolving the definitions of words and language in order to creatively interpret the intention of the laws, has also been an acceptable practice by the DOD/CIA. There is not a single concept in the Bill of Rights, Declaration of Independence, and Constitution that has not been overturned by these criminals now running the shadow government. It is truly amazing to watch how something like the television actually programs people. If it is their only information source, it has a strong influence. CBS was started by an ex-CIA agent. As we all know, you never leave the company. In other lands, government openly own television networks and other large industries. In the United States it is done covertly, but with exactly the same influences. Why do you think good people are pushing for campaign reforms? There is a very strong correlation between the amount of money a candidate has for their campaign and how much mind share they can garner. We move further away from a meritocracy every day. To the world you may be one person. But to one person you may be the world. Unknown. More moral and philosophical ramifications. So your brain patterns have been mapped and classified by the mind control and torture weapon system. Patterns of thoughts are injected or transmitted by the microwave transmitters whose signal reverberates in your skull, the head echo effect as it is slyly termed. It is the patterns of information that contain consciousness. So the controllers of the Continental Ballistic Missile Shield, aka ionospheric heaters, can determine who lives a hell on Earth, but an even more frightening spiritual thought is that they can continue the torture even after death with your thought clone. Your clone is just bits of information that they have been classified as your brain patterns. Is this simulation your kindred spirit? The torture simulation of your brain's electrical signals can continue to play even without the flesh that houses the memories. Do you have a moral obligation to save your digital self from continued torture? If it were you being tortured, would your digital self try to save you at all costs? It is fair to use the word evil in this context, I think. Hard to be proud that this is how the United States is using its secret weapon. Small minds, corrupted individuals currently control this global human surveillance system of tyranny and virtual eternal hell. So much good could have come of it in different hands. Sigh. So how far does the virtual hell extend? Since it is created with electromagnetics, hypothetically it depends on how good the sensors are and how powerful the transmitters are. With each launch of another spy satellite and completion of another ionospheric heater, hell's boundaries increase. Hypothetically, since we can view the edge of the universe with the Hubble Space Telescope, and electromagnetic waves travel forever with only minor losses. Hard to imagine why the United States is called the Great Satan. My God, what have we done? I wrote a short fictional story about a very advanced civilization who evolved culturally to the point where their psychophysics understanding led them to the moral belief that they were to create manufacturing centers around the universe which produced happy entities. They so fully mapped the subjective experiences of happiness to complex signals, that their moral society felt that it was their duty to increase the quantitative amount of the happy signal everywhere in the universe by reproducing just those patterns that lead to a subjective experience for those entities of blissfulness. The power junkies justified the creation of hell by appealing to people's fear. We need to spy into people's minds to gather intelligence to stop terrorists. We are creating a maximum pain weapon so we don't need to kill people in the battlefield. We throw the voice of God in order to trick the enemy to lay down their arms. We need to control society's minds so no one builds weapons of mass destruction. The rationalizations are endless. But in the end, they created a system that is being used to secretly torture people without relief of death. The system, TAMI, should be renamed Hell. No one seems to talk about a pleasure weapon. Make the enemy happy and relaxed so they don't feel like fighting. Make people feel happy so they don't want to build weapons of mass destruction. Make people feel generous so they share and give more. Make them care about their fellow man. These brain signals are not being collected and tested for TAMI. Why? You get the idea why a coup has occurred with this weapons system. If you are a politician or judge, you can be subtly mind-controlled, or tele-influenced, into not passing or passing any given law. As you are watched, information from your mind is collected that can be used as blackmail, and that threat always looms with just a leak to the press. If you are president, you are sheltered from the knowledge of the active uses of this system so that it can plausibly be denied by someone who is passionate about the denial but just doesn't know better. There are not many journalists brave enough to take on this topic without threats that they may become part of the psychotronic torture network. So we all remain quiet and pretend that we are free. Our freedom was stolen and no one cares, it seems. Let's just politely talk about less important issues, like torturing Iraqis while we free them. That will keep our minds off the depressing reality of our own situation. Every attempt by Congress to stop military and CIA weapons testing on civilians has been shut down. Every attempt to make mind control and neurological weapons banned from space has been squelched. They will not stop expanding Hell's reach. The temptation of the power is too great for any mortal man or nation to resist. Our forefathers had a dream of a free world. They could not anticipate the rise of rogue government elements to power in a mind control system called TAMI. That dream is gone from us now. The psychology of deception. Cowardly New World. Ye shall know the truth and the truth shall make you mad. Aldous Huxley, author of Brave New World. Fear is the best motivator. Make people afraid of a nuclear attack at any time by the Russians, they will approve of massive dollars to be spent on Star Wars defenses. Make the people afraid of ethnicities who wear turbans and they will approve of huge budgets for homeland defense to fight terrorism and be willing to give up some freedoms. Nothing goes into the patent office without the military looking at its potential as a weapon. The absurd extremes the DoD goes to staying ahead on weapons development has probably at some point in their history had them set up a lab dedicated to stabbing animals with writing instruments to test the axiom of whether the pen is mightier than the sword. Humans are cheaper than robots according to Pentagon documents. That is why we still send soldiers into battle. This philosophy is also prevalent in their weapons development. Human costs and misery do not appear in DoD proposals and bottom-line figures. We are, cost, free to be slaughtered like cattle for weapons development. The disinformation age and the art of deception. Gracchus, he will bring them death, and they will love him for it. Gracchus, fear and wonder, a powerful combination. Gaius, you really think people are going to be seduced by that? Gracchus, I think he knows what Rome is. Rome is the mob. Conjure magic for them and they'll be distracted. Take away their freedom and still they'll roar. The beating heart of Rome is not the marble of the Senate, it's the sand of the Colosseum. He'll bring them death, and they will love him for it. Gladiator. Government deception programs. INSCOM is the division that furthers strategic deception and has been hard at work with the UFO and paranormal research communities. Uncle Sam wants you, stupid and ignorant. President Clinton was apologizing for military/CIA experiments conducted on black people on whom were unknowing participants in a syphilis study. They were purposefully not treated to observe the progression of the disease. 26 died. Similar experiments were done with herpes and other diseases. At the same time Clinton is apologizing for other presidents who did not leash their dogs of war. He and his military were involved in ramping up human torture experimentation trials with nervous system disruptor weapons. Similar episodes occurred with Bush Sr. and Jr. It is the American way to experiment, torture, and kill randomly selected citizens to keep up with military weapons statistics data and then have presidents apologize when the information is released 20 to 30 years later. Nothing will change, and we should come to grips with it as a nation. This is the unspoken death lottery the military holds because they aren't smart enough to come up with other solutions. We have to do it because the Russians are testing remote control heart attack weapons. We must sacrifice a few to understand the weapons' capabilities, is the softly spoken military view. What it is to be American. This book has been translated into 12 languages. If you are lucky enough not to be American, when I use the word we I mean us Americans. You are probably already very aware of the two faces of the United States, the words we propagandize through media and politicians, and the shadow government that creates wars and rationales for them. The military even greatly influences our politicians and media. We teach our kids how to kill at an early age with mostly guns as toys in our stores. We are one of the most violent and militant cultures in the world, as can be seen in our movies and murder rates. Other countries should fear us as we are the sole superpower, and have clear intentions on expansion of our influence. Other countries would be well advised to hold secret meetings to partner and balance the power. And I offer this advice for those lucky enough to be patriotic flag-waving ignorance like I was only 2 years ago. Enjoy the delusion and pray your number or loved ones are not the next to be drawn. Showing support for an ideal is good, but supporting a facade system that has taken those same colors will help destroy those very ideals. I am doing my part to stop the CIA and the military's international criminal behavior by documenting the steps and methods, gathered from my interviews with the thousands of American experiments, that they are using to create Manchurian candidates, suicide bombers, and dissidents in other lands to destabilize them. With the knowledge of the weapons and methods used to hack the human mind, these countries might stand a chance at deprogramming and disrupting the United States criminal-sponsored networks and discovering the double agents within their own security agencies. Methods of discrediting, gaslighting. We natural use a philosophy of Occam's razor which states that the simplest explanation is usually the best. So to make someone sound paranoid, all you have to do is come up with a sufficiently complex plan of harassment, and the majority of people's disbelief of that event will be sufficient not to act or care about it. If you study the psychology of people like psychological operations and the CIA do, you can predict with a certain degree of accuracy what that person will believe giving certain facts. We like to believe we are spontaneous and have choice, but when viewed objectively that subjective feeling of choice becomes nothing more than a low probability of neural firing events. When people describe their decisions, they often say I had no choice. This is simply a strong probability of neural firing events. Logic often dictates the strongest neural firing pathways given certain possible actions. You have just learned a basic principle of psychophysics by mapping the subjective experience of choice to the objective causalities of brain dynamics. Politicians use the tactic of discrediting their opponent through mudslinging. Making up or digging up dirt that makes people question the honesty and validity of their opponent's statements is the goal of many campaigns these days. The CIA and foreign intelligence agencies use skeletons of politicians to control them through blackmail. If someone gets out of line, a leak to the press is all it takes to disable them as a force of change. Lawyers use the discrediting tactic on witnesses. By trying to demonstrate to the jury a pattern of lying, misperceptions, or ulterior motives, they can successfully discredit a witness. While all these traditional tactics have proven fruitful throughout time without waning effectiveness, the agencies involved in extreme cover-ups prefer another tactic that seems to have withstood the test of time too. That is labeling someone paranoid, schizophrenic, or mentally ill. Once that label has been attached to someone, almost all testimony will be disbelieved. The military has employed this tactic since the 60s to get rebellious soldiers and others locked up in mental hospitals. But since the weapons testing of neurological disruptor technology has begun on the general population beginning in the early 60s and then stepped up to full throttle in 1976, the scope of what is considered mentally ill had to be reprogrammed into a broader definition for the general population. The movie A Beautiful Mind was timed to program people with the notion that even geniuses can be mentally ill. So even if a brilliant person, whose logic is impeccable, describes hearing voices, their account should be dismissed, and they may be violent and dangerous if they believe their delusion. Perhaps, but if you look at the details of the way the mind works, it is extremely unlikely for the majority of the brain to function perfectly, especially the higher level cognitive functions, and the auditory and visual pathways to be severely compromised specifically. When one delves into the details of the science of the mind and current weapons capabilities, it becomes obvious that the more probable event is actually the more complicated in terms of the history of the United States human effects weapons testing programs and the science behind it, counterintuitive to the Occam's razor principle at first blush. Strategic deception. Actions must be judged in the context of all possibilities to understand their meaning, the actor's motives, and their relevance. Another tactic that has successfully been employed by the government agents to help hide their secret concentration camps and human experimentation using this technology is by sending agents to pose as victims. Their task is to be outspoken and as crazy sounding as possible. I have run into at least 2 of these actors. This kind of warfare has commonly been used by the CIA to manipulate foreign countries' power circles. The psychological method works on the same principles as other disinformation tactics. It relies on the average person's tendency to generalize a single sample point to a whole group and use binary thinking. These common logical flaws have been exploited to deceive the public for many decades. Simply by getting a couple of agents to pretend they are psychotronic slaves and then have them talk about evil aliens or other typically non-believable topics, the whole group of people who now talk about electromagnetic brain manipulation is associated with evil aliens and not believed by the average person who heard the first story. This is a simple tactic but has proven to work very effectively on making the average person with limited time and input come to faulty conclusions and judgments about testimony related to the same topic. Psychological warfare, information warfare, and strategic deception are actively used treasonously on our own population. Just because these criminals are using invisible directed energy weapons and not guns, and because they redefined information warfare as propaganda, we are supposed to think it is less than war and murder of the citizens. These are invisible weapons being used far more destructively than a simple bullet to the head. Another often used tactic of misdirection is to create a large drama for public consumption. In the past, when these activities were gaining more attention, political scandals were leaked to the press or some other drama created. I would wager that by the time this book is published, the United States will have started down the road to invading Iran, then Syria, followed by North Korea. Another war would be a good distraction from the topics covered in this book, which might lead to greater awareness and self-realizations, and then possibly awakening the giant from his slumber. How the media is used to distract the attention of focus of the populace. Other scandals timed to overpower the focus of the media have occurred with previous discovery of ultra mind control programs like during Nixon's Watergate. Political scandal can easily hide and draw attention away from more ominous threats that are too ugly or complicated for a news bite. Clinton wasn't totally lying when he said there is a vast conspiracy to control politics. The effectiveness of precisely timed media leaks has proven to be a useful tool. The Art of Deception. Michael Mitnick, a famous computer hacker, wrote a book called The Art of Deception. He describes how most of his break-ins to defense computer systems were not done by in-depth technical knowledge, but rather social engineering. His preferred method of attack was pretending to be someone else and trick them into giving him their password. He now consults to government agencies. The opposite set of techniques are frequently used by the intelligence community in their domestic missions. Pretending to be cops or FBI or some other profession is extremely useful to getting things done. The psychological methods used are confidence games. A lie will more likely to be believed if it is backed by lots of details. I had my class work on creating Googlisms as an exercise in this type of belief manipulation. An example of a Googlism can be seen by typing in the words, "miserable failure" into the Google search engine. The first link is a biography of President George Bush. While I am not saying that may not be the truth, it certainly is an opinion that could be made into common belief with enough advertising and mental impressions onto the population. Wizard of Ounce. The CIA has a style of interrogation that they call Wizard of Ounce. It is supposed to disorientate the subject. It requires intense role play like good cop bad cop. They act stupid as if they don't have a brain. They are vicious like they don't have a heart. And they act paranoid and cowardly with no courage like in reality. The other style of interrogation they use both in the EEG heterodyne mode or in person they call Alice in Wonderland. They set clocks again and keep the subject awake for days. They induce electromagnetically or with LSD skewed perceptions, visual and audio slanted perspectives. They test these on the American public and the world. This is part of the script to chase the white rabbit down the maze of lies. Ponzi schemes. So put a CIA-paid disinformant posing as a mind control victim and give them some airtime to really sound crazy. That will make the public generalize to the whole class of victims and keep this 35 to 40-year scam of torture and silent assignations under wraps, commands the high trader in the United States government. Discrediting methods. The method. The method, as they call it, a psychological tool used methodically to cover up top-secret technology and military abuses, has been exceedingly successfully exploited for decades. Psychlops, Psychological Operations, specializes in these techniques, always in production worldwide. They seed the population through popular TV shows, movies, and magazines with references to some truth they are worried will cause common belief, but in a context that discredits that idea very thoroughly. The X-Files is an example of this. So is the movie The Matrix. Put the science fiction technology and government abuses in a metaphor and most will assume it doesn't exist. Sprinkle in some aliens, psychics, and presto, every idea presented is assumed to be absurd. This psychological trick works well because most people tend to be black or white thinkers. I have extensively studied this method through tracking of the disinformation websites used to flood and obscure the truth on this topic. They have not changed the formula for decades. I still want to interview the Wachowski brothers and Ms. Stewart, the writers of The Matrix, to find out how they got such an accurate metaphor for the capabilities of RHIC and EEG heterodyning technologies. Was the story EEG heterodyned into Ms. Stewart so that it would be used to discredit the technology as science fiction by Hollywood, or were they given an anonymous script by a CIA agent? Additionally, I want to know what inspired the writers of The X-Files. If you listen to the hidden track on the X-Files album, they speak about cloning and cataloging operations and orders taken from a man named Strugold. EEG heterodyning has also been called EEG cloning. The CIA has been cataloging the variations of brains for decades for the personality profile database that I was told by B.F. Skinner in class was kept in Colorado. Strugold was a US/German scientist who died in the 70s involved with psychotronic research. Finally, the last important movie used to seed the popular beliefs of the masses was The Beautiful Mind. It is a story how a genius Nobel Prize winner, Nash, became paranoid schizophrenic but at times dangerous because of his delusions. This programs the average person to accept that smart people can go insane and think the government is stalking them. These three movies alone set the stage for stepping up the EEG cloning experiments and torture weapons data collection starting 1996, where a dramatic increase in the number of psychotronic victims began to occur until present. The 1963 series of The Outer Limits did the same thing for that generation of Americans. Confuscation techniques. Flooding the mind space with conflicting information. Using internet, books, and strategic leaks and placed agents of deception in editorial positions or Hollywood. Confusing the victims, so that their own testimony promotes misunderstands. Increasing the complexity of the story significantly. Using absurdity and the bizarre. Promoting false conclusions and bad science. Mimicking the symptoms of known illnesses. The United States Army Psychological Ops pay and publish false articles in the Iraqi newspapers. Standard techniques to change the minds of the masses using unethical anti-democratic principles. Rewriting history. How easy is it to rewrite history? We know that the victor in war writes the accepted version of it. How does information and how do facts flow from primary sources to widely distributed history textbooks taught to the children in public schools? The sociological study of these questions reveals a type of brainwashing of our society. There is virtue in the importance of being honest with ourselves and our history. Making our children feel proud to be American is important if it is deserved. Having them recite the mantras of the Pledge of Allegiance every day in grade school might help with their sense of community later in life. Before every sporting event, we stand and listening to the American anthem as adults. There is resemblance of the psychological technique called psychic driving and mindless recitation of words that we should be aware of so as we are not unduly influenced. Describing how the Native American Indians were slaughtered and how we devalued other humans to turn them into slaves is described in history textbooks given the magnitude of the atrocities. However, this long tradition of human abuses has yet to end in American history. Our government just gets better at covering it up. The grotesque human experiments, which were conducted on tens of thousands of randomly chosen citizens for weapons testing data, are not mentioned in any history book that I can find. It is being removed from the collective awareness of our country so that it can continue. Secret censorship. Another disturbing phenomenon which I encountered during my 2-year investigation into government improprieties and criminal behavior was the systematic removal of important books from libraries and circulation across the country. I was told by a CIA expert who follows and analyzes their constitutional crimes on Americans, that anyone who says a negative thing about Scientology will be nuisance sued, have their lives systematically destroyed, and the publication will disappear from all libraries and newsstands. I have a different theory. There appears to be a mild connection between CIA mind control, EEG heterodyning, and Scientology. A former member published a book on it. When the experimentation began on me, I received 2 copies of a Scientology publication on death doctors and mind control without a postage stamp in my mailbox 2 weeks in a row. I liked the articles, but they failed to mention that most of the death doctors who they describe as being behind the creation of the rise in terrorism were CIA funded. Several other victims say they found themselves pressured to join Scientology out of the blue when their victimization started. I don't believe Scientology as an organization is connected directly with any of it. All organizations that are cultish as viewed by the government, are closely watched and infiltrated. And certainly given the power and influence Scientology has with so many rich, famous people, the organization could pose a potential threat to the government. So, a tactic that the CIA is famous for is to redirect suspicion and anger towards the threatening group. I believe that this is what is happening to Scientology. The member who wrote about aliens controlling everything at the top level secrecy in Scientology was a typical victim of EEG heterodyne mind manipulation. He just pointed the finger at Scientology. I am not just saying this because I don't want them to pull my book off the shelves. I think they need to defend their reputation that the government is trying to tarnish, just like with secret societies and many other institutions with influence and power. Most of the books that were pulled hypothesized by the analyst also had CIA mind control references in them. That is the reason they were pulled. Several books like this one, who brashly and openly discuss government corruption and technologies, have disappeared from circulation. Several of those I tried to get hold of were running upwards of $200 in private auctions. Secret societies. One of my professors who had Bill Gates in his class while he was writing Microsoft DOS or BASIC would tell stories how he would sleep through most of class with his head down on his desk and occasionally raise his hand to answer a question where he would inevitably say, "What about microcomputers?" The professor admits that they were all wrong and they thought he was insane for suggesting microcomputers would in every home. My brother's roommate in college was the president's son of West Germany, Walter Kohl. Supposedly he blackballed me entrance into one of Harvard's secret societies, the SPI Club. They are called finals clubs at Harvard, secret societies at Yale, and eating clubs at Princeton. They are just fraternities with rich kids. To prove I am authentic, I am divulging many secret societies joining rituals in my books. These are fraternities and should not have their names tarnished in this horrific, evil, conspiracy that they have been implicated in and who don't even try to clear their clubs' names and reputations. Secret societies are not evil, but individuals are. So to entice the reader, at Harvard's Porcelain Club they ride a boar for initiation. At the Delphic Club they stroke the beard of the moose blindfolded. On one particular visit, I had to slap my member next to Matt Damon because we were skunked at beer pong and girls were present. Club rules. I've been in Yale's Skull and Bones Club after a Harvard/Yale football game. For initiation they sleep in a coffin next to a human head, is what Bush and others have done. What they do in the coffin seems to be extra. So in my next book, I will divulge every secret society's initiation ritual, both to bring attention and exonerate them as being culpable and conspiratorial of being behind the world's torture, and to alert them that nothing is sacred anymore. America's heritage and pride is being destroyed by these cretins holding the weapons and keeping secrets from those most noble and honorable to lead them. I was passed a profile that listed the surveillance these secret societies were under. I assume this kind of information has spawned the plethora of conspiracy theory behind them. Mind-reading radar and EEG heterodyning has been spying into the minds of everyone in their most intimate moments. They have profiles on almost everyone to use as blackmail or to manipulate. Just to give the reader a truer perspective and to diminishing the unjustified royalty image the wealthy and celebrity enjoy from the masses who often worship them, I will reiterate a couple stories conveyed to me during my years just after graduate school at Harvard. Most world leaders belong to a club called the Bohemian Club. One of my friends had a retired 4-star general managing his vineyards. The general was a member of the Bohemian Club. Just to give you an idea of the lack of true nobility and integrity of many of its members, the general ended up embezzling money from this operation. My friend took him to court where he cried and asked for leniency. Another tale told to me in confidence, but I must breach it due to the more important issues involved in my book, is that another friend of mine shared a house with a known United States assassin named Spencer that the Washington Post reported about. Spencer was gay. Why many the United States assassins are gay is still a mystery to me. I've been told many speculations. In any case, he could walk into the White House and escort my friend without showing ID. Of course he made many attempts to convert my friend's sexual preference. Spence died of AIDS. Sounds incredible, but this is the truth of our country. The non-lethal weapons lie. In marketing, the concept is called brand confusion. That is where the consumer gets confused about the message or naming of a product. This is considered bad because there is value in the brand name based upon mind share and recognition. In the military deception game, brand confusion is very good. So having multiple names for the same weapon causes brand confusion. Nobody knows what anyone else is talking about if you keep changing the vocabulary. So here is a sampling of the many names this single weapon system has gone under. Psi weapons, non-lethal weapons, directed energy weapons, cognitive modeling influencers, voice of God weapons, synthetic telepathy, EEG cloning, EEG heterodyning, neural telemetry, biotelemetry, scalar weapons, behavioral biophysics, microwave weapons, mind control, bioenergetics, neuroinfluencing, mind meld, remote interrogations, remote hypnotic intracerebral control, neuralizer, RHIC, EDM, telesuggestion, parapsychology, radiofrequency weapons, psychotronics, radionics, telecybernetics, bioelectromagnetics, non-thermal effects research, remote brainwave monitoring, psychic spying, stealth radar, microwave interferometry, high-frequency pulsed ELF waves, thought reader radar, informational weapons, and the list goes on for another 2 pages. Now this is brand confusion in the extreme. It is easy to research what the criminals in the shadow government are up to because it is so easy to spot what they are trying to hide by what is obviously missing in a trend of research or how they use brand confusion to slow the information flow. So the lie that is perpetuated in the military and communicated to others who must approve these weapons tests is that electromagnetic mind influencing is non-lethal. What that really means is that on the most part it takes a while to kill someone. There is only a 5% increase risk of brain cancer, my inside sources tell me. That is on par with cops that use speeding radar emitters' increased rate of testicular cancer. It isn't all that significant. The lethality of the EEG heterodyning and directed energy weapons testing comes in very different forms. The whole category should be more accurately renamed slow kill weapons or unpredictably deadly weapons. But it would be far more difficult to internally market a classification like this for budgeting purposes. The ways the technology becomes deadly is both on purpose and accidental. See the section on silent assassinations. Whores of wars. The famous Bush family lies. Clinton lies. Porter Goss lies. Creative interpretation of laws. He too is guilty of not keeping a leash on his dogs of war and the hounds of hell. Using dupe public relations personnel to lie. Caveat emptor, buyer beware. Carefully constructed and thoroughly thought out psychographic maps of buyer behavior are constructed by the most sophisticated marketing companies in the world like Procter & Gamble. The goal of all marketing is to get to yes. Its goal in a capitalist framework is not to impart well-rounded truth so a buyer can optimize the maximum utility for him/herself. Our rational conscious mind should allow most people to filter out the biases of the information. However, hypnosis, subconscious and subliminal control enters the mind at a level that allows the information to be accepted at face value without these conscious filters. It is extremely dangerous for our own personal welfare. The hypnosis and subliminal programming can be done by these directed energy mind control weapons while a person sleeps. The rabbit hole goes deeper than this. Military myths. What is a psychic? Notes. How they are found. Why they are psychics. Chemical messengers versus electrical. Versus easily hypnotized. The word psychic is also used as a joke amongst the cloners. Psychic, meaning of the mind, is also close to the word psychotic. I saw it twice in translated Russian literature on paranormal activity and psychic phenomenon that the word psychotic used accidentally in place of psychic. Also, overly stimulated minds exhibit strong electrical signals and are easier to spot as well as piggyback the current electrical brain signals with others, that is neurotransmitter modulations. Intellectuals and schizophrenics exhibit increased electrical brain activity. The other condition that determines this slang use of the word psychic is the disability of the subject to be easily hypnotized. Or in other words, their brains entrained to external stimuli quickly. Those that have been marked by what the underground has termed nanotech are more easily illuminated and tracked. I suspect the nanotech replaces the radiation that used to be fed to 500,000 Americans. I would like to exhume the bodies of several victims to try to identify with an electron scanning tunneling microscope what the nanotech really is that supposedly is found in the cerebral fluid throughout the brain. If it exists at all. It would be a somewhat lame weapon if a battlefield had to be sprayed with aerosol nanotech before EEG heterodyning weapons could be used. Remember that the biocommunication signal piggybacks normal brain activity and needs to modulate existing neurotransmitter releases. So more neural activity, more strongly the biocommunication neural link is. This is why psychotics are often the targets of choice for experimentation. Channelers. All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. Shakespeare. As you like it 2/7. But when you are EEG cloned, you become part of the audience. You have already made your choices. You are here to understand why. The Oracle. The movie, The Matrix. One psychic phenomenon that is relevant to psychic warfare and EEG heterodyning is the classic channeling of spirits beyond the grave. EEG cloning feels like what is portrayed by Hollywood psychic channelers. It is a hypnotized, disassociated state that makes you feel that you are watching a movie but not participating in it. The reason for this subjective feeling of disassociation while fully cloning someone else's brainwaves is due to the psychophysics phenomena of choice. If one has no choices of how their electrical brainwave patterns proceed because there were few decision nodes that were close to the firing threshold, they will not subjectively experience choice and feel like they are not participating in any decision. This is how the subjective experience changes, all due to the neuronal firing probabilities. The conscious subject experience is mapped to that probability. Now this is useful for the public at large to notice if a psychic war has initiated between countries. One should be able to notice a change of mental state resembling a feeling of being disassociated while they are being electromagnetically influenced, that is EEG cloned. On the most part, society is ignorant of the scale of government stupidity. One can be fixed with knowledge but the other is forever. Poisonous memes, mind viruses, and toxic thoughts. Richard Dawkins coined the term meme. He created a new field of study called mimics. It is a concept derived from evolutionary genetics, that is genes. Memes representing cultural fads, thoughts, and ideas replicate, mix, and mutate in the minds of groups as they spread. It is a way of analyzing abstract cultural concepts using the same rules and framework as genetic evolution. Of course, the military and CIA had to weaponize the idea into mimic warfare, which is executed through the divisions of psychological operations and information warfare units. When this kind of war is instituted on their country, it is renamed propaganda and strategic disinformation. The marketing terms used to treasonously attack your own country are important to get buy-in from your co-conspirators. The Department of Defense has several lifelong projects that they are proposing and may have been approved by the time this book is published. One is to study the formation of relationships by people. How would you do that? This means spying on people for their entire lives without them knowing. Pretty scary how good they have become at marketing domestic spying. Secondly, how do you think they can actually implement this without the subject getting spooked that people are stalking or following them? EEG cloning is how they watch all their experiments. And lastly, what the hell is the DOD doing studying relationships? Do they want to become marriage counselors? No, they are studying mimic warfare. They are watching how information travels and trusts are built. It is a way to control and enslave the population in the end. It is a way to limit freedom of speech, or more importantly its influence. It is a way to mold the culture according to their twisted, dictatorial, sociopathic, brainwashed ideals, not American or constitutional values. It is the tail wagging the dog. So what is next on DARPA's/DOD's/CIA's plate to create and integrate into TAMI? The proposed projects that have crossed my path in my research are worse than Total Information Awareness, the V, and Clipper Chips, Echelon, and NSA domestic spying combined. It is hidden in the DoD's proposal to study how relationships form. Sounds innocuous enough, doesn't it? The application that is planned to come out of it is to track all relationships and connections. While in strategic sales, I used to create influence maps. These maps are an analysis of who in a company influences sales and technology decisions and other people. They have weighted links between the various players. TAMI will eventually be used to track neural information flows between people. Once this happens, the matrix of deception will be complete and the free world will be lost and replaced by an illusion acceptable to most. At the highest level, this program will allow the operator to click on a person, either his or her neural profile, location, or name, and display a 3D mesh of interrelated people and the strength of their relationships. The links are displayed in proportion to metrics like the number of emails, phone calls, remember the NSA phone database, letters, or face-to-face conversations they have had. TAMI can automatically keep track of people's proximity to each other and determine whether a conversation is occurring from the back-and-forth verbal exchange pattern. This way, information leaks that may wake a larger portion of the population up to the fascist takeover, can be silenced through a number of methods ranging from disinformation intervention, subliminal neural influence and reprogramming, to plausibly denied natural deaths in the extreme. Sketch of 3D rotatable multinodal relationship maps. How far has the study of mimic and information warfare gone? When the Pentagon was setting up the Psychic Warfare Unit, they recruited the worst prison inmates from around the country back in the 70s. Why would you do this? By finding the scum of the scum, the worst subhuman creatures on the planet, they were testing a new kind of warfare. TAMI, Thought Amplifier and Mind Interface, is being used to amplify and multiply these toxic minds onto other people to see if they become violent or self-destructive. Interesting weapon indeed. This is truly the definition of a mind virus. To bring it back to the movie The Matrix, Agent Smith becomes a virus replicating his destructive persona on anyone he comes into contact with. You can imagine the kinds of economic espionage this weapon would have on a culture. Strange that they are also conducting economic espionage on the United States for these large tests without the Secret Service being the wiser. During one of my searches through information warfare documents, I came across the strange strategy of making an enemy search down a seemingly endless path of misinformation. I thought this to be a strange kind of warfare and wondered how it could be implemented. But I discovered it is being used on test victims. All victims go through the same research process to try to figure out how their brain waves are being modulated. Inevitably they go to the internet to search for mind control weapons. It will lead you to Bearden's websites, which are all in the top 50 hits. Here the discussion takes on the form of scalar waves and Russian weapons. Strange and mystical like pseudosciences are introduced where interfering electromagnetic waves and photons get new bizarre qualities when they meet and cancel their fields out. This is not a mistake. I immediately recognized it to be an example of information warfare on the victim community. Who else reads this stuff? It takes you down an endless maze of crazy physics and tells a technology of free energy that no one will acknowledge in Western science. Scalar waves, which is just a special case of interferometry, can be used as a stealthy radar technique like what was used on the United States Embassy in Moscow. But the research doesn't say that, it talks about purposefully misleading things in the absurd. The military is conducting information warfare operations on the United States public. You will find that nearly all ex-military connected researchers in this area are misinformation agents. Anti-gravity waves is another example of this misinformation campaign. When the photons fields exactly cancel each other out, some scientists refer to the resulting beam as gravity waves. Photons have momentum, or E equals mc2, which means energy even if not measurable as mass. So yes, one could say that scalar waves are gravity waves in essence. But momentum of a photon is its energy divided by the speed of light. It is ridiculously small to be useful as a repulsive gravity beam device, as some Russian scientists claim. Apparently the Russians are very involved in the scientific espionage game too. Superconductors will create reflected gravity waves from any incoming M source because they create an opposite electromagnetic field to cancel and exactly oppose M beams. So the CIA/DOD has created a true mind virus. This is how it works. When they choose a target to be silently assassinated and ultra tortured, they use a set of scripts that have worked in the past to confuse targets and make them look crazy. These scripts evolve depending on the beliefs of the target. At each branch of the growing base of knowledge and understanding, errors of logic are interjected in the mind meld. Other sources support the slightly illogical conclusions that targets reach. You will have other people talk about their alien abduction. You will find the misinformation supported on the internet under strategic keywords. While the victim tries all the possible routes of understanding, the mind virus hive is collecting the false ideas that person comes to and tries to amplify that line of thinking. They are also collecting any new paths of thinking to be added to the collection of misinformation scripts to be used on other people. This is a mind virus. It replicates and destroys minds. It needs TAMI and an army of broken minds to be really effective, but the information virus can replicate through tradition information streams too. There is evidence that perhaps this isn't just an exercise anymore. Both the TWA Flight 800, Waco, and the Oklahoma bombing investigations were botched, and many experts involved in all these investigations said that the wrong conclusions were found. Mimemic information warfare would account for this, assuming no blatant corruption in the chain of command occurred. The balance between good and evil might be equivocated to the imbalance of virtuous memes versus selfish ones. The meme selfish gene generation would be an example of an imbalance occurring between the survival advantages of altruistic ideas that benefit the whole and selfishness which benefits the individual at the expense of the whole. Altering an enemy's country's culture so that it becomes more selfish, superstitious, or criminal would be a use for mimemic warfare, for example. Secrecy spawns mind or mimemic viruses. In order for higher order systems to become viral, secrecy needs to be the fertile ground in which they can incubate. Government programs and agencies under the umbrella of national security have become this fertile ground for spawning the culture and ideas that are suboptimal to the entire human race and difficult to conceptualize without dedicated study. Mind viral warfare. There is another hypothesis that is greatly disturbing that we must consider as a possibility, which is a result from the bizarre and grotesque research of the cognitive modeling and neuroscientists who have worked for the conspiracy. That is, a nearly perfect simulation of a demented mind has been created. That single model could be reused by a computer during these EEG cloning experiments. That demented mind model I will refer to as the mind virus. It is the most perfectly mentally deranged psychopathology that the CIA/DOD monsters could come up with. That simulated mind virus could be grown into anyone via virtual neurons and the self-organizing nature of biological neural networks. See the section on virtual neurons for a better understanding of biocommunication technology. EEG cloning would allow this weapon to scale to large population sizes by cloning this mind virus with all its toxic thoughts into anyone if the weapon system targeted his/her body/brain signatures. It only requires more computing power to add unlimited scalability. This is how EEG cloning could be used as a full-scale weapon without requiring a real army behind it. Is there evidence that the mind virus exists? Yes. Many of the idiosyncrasies of the EEG heterodyne personalities are similar. For example, several torture test subjects state that their EEG cloner wiggles their tongue all the time like a snake, which causes the victim to wiggle their tongue. This is a very unusual nervous habit, and to find it accidentally reported by more than 2 people leads one to believe it might be the same cognitive model simulation running. There have been several personality types described in detail that match other personality types reported from other victims. The conversations and scripts are nearly identical in hundreds of cases. There could be several variations of mind viruses that they are testing. Perhaps the setup is one simulated toxic mind virus and a couple loosely connected real heterodyne people to observe the progression of induced mental illness and record the success of the mind virus. Remember in the movie The Matrix Revolutions, where Agent Smith becomes a virus and starts cloning himself into everyone he touches? There only needs to be one nearly perfect cognitive model like this. The supercomputer can evolve and simulate multiple copies of that mind virus for everyone. Think about this mind virus as a much more advanced ELISA artificial intelligence program. However, rather than based on just words and some logical inference engine, it uses a neural network model. It is fairly easy to extrapolate what weapons they are developing using the 1% of the population with schizophrenia or wrongly diagnosed with it. Now what if after World War II the Nazis had the last say? They could have cloned a sociopathic Nazi mindset and started copying it to the entire world. Do you see the urgency to expose and stop this research, especially if you are Jewish? I must question again. What is the real percent of naturally occurring mental illness and what percent are DOD/CIA experiments for this line of weapons development? These torture tests have been going on since 1947. How many have to suffer and die for mass stupidity? Diabolically evil indeed. Can you begin to see why the United States is called the Great Satan by other countries who aren't in the American delusion and mentally congested by the United States information gridlock and propaganda show? The Muslim fundamentalists appear crazy to people in the American delusion, and we appear callous, stupid, and controlled from their viewpoint. Who's right? How can we know, since our government keeps so many secrets and lies to us much of the time? Do you notice a trend of how we use the crazy diagnosis so quickly when we don't understand the context of someone's behavior? It is a final catchphrase like national security. No more questions or thought needs to be put into it because we have the answer. He, she, they are crazy is the popular understanding. Using a word like crazy is like creating a god to explain an event. We don't understand how the sun rises each day, so we will create Zeus to explain it and no more questions should be asked. It is the same psychology. The gods must be crazy. Imagine a doctor who creates and releases a flu virus just so he can have more business each year. That's what the military does by secretly inciting war. Imagine if you dedicated your life to psychiatry and found out that you have been misdiagnosing many of your patients due to a scam. Faulty information inserted into textbooks that you obediently regurgitated. How would you feel? It would be a painful realization to find out you wasted your life through a betrayal of the shadow government. Well, the time is drawing nearer to that awakening for many of them. They better learn some coping mechanisms. So what do you do to a president who commits and participates in high treason according to the laws of the country? Some investigators contend there is a Nazi link to the Bush family. If the connections can be proven and shown, you can see that the country is in a desperate situation with its leadership. A president is not exempt from high treason just because they leave office or get impeached. Every live ex-president would need to be sentenced accordingly too. Higher order intelligence. While we are on the topic of mental illness, I thought I would share an insight into intelligent organizational architectures. One can think of an organization as an intelligent evolving entity. So if we use this larger perspective to understand what abnormal and detrimental behaviors might occur if similar practices of informational organization are used as by neurotics or psychopaths. For example, a person who suffers a severe traumatic event often learns how to repress memories and segment ideas and thoughts in order not to deal with the pain, often leading to sociopathic tendencies. A country who keeps too many secrets from itself and compartmentalizes knowledge on a need-to-know basis laced with lots of self-lies will too exhibit neurotic-like illnesses when judged as a whole. Throw in multiple personalities from changing leaders every 4 years and having a rogue shadow government and you have a recipe for problematic self-destructive behavior of that organization. You can see why other countries view America as schizophrenic. I have taken great interest in researching and understanding organizational intelligence. Why did our form of government fail? How did this implementation of democracy go awry? Where did the management control mechanisms break down? Information warfare works as an internet strategy according to War College documents by having people chase the white rabbit around the endless maze of disinformation so that they can't even tell what is true anymore. The only people who research these topics are the thousands of victims. No one else takes an interest. Why isn't virtual reality and neural computer interfacing of interest to entrepreneurs or academic researchers? It has already been demonstrated to work, so the research would pay off handsomely for whomever cracked the brain code. The CIA/DOD figured it out well over 30 years ago. Surely it can't be that difficult with the right equipment. This is how freedom of speech is destroyed by self-attack of information warfare on the United States that they market as strategic deception. Just remember, there is more than one way to skin a rabbit. Mental illness taboo topic and preferred cover-up technique for the last few decades. The most amazing discovery I found was in trying to find the statistics of how many government drug and directed energy mind control weapons victims there were in the general population of classified schizophrenics. To my surprise, over half of the patients at one hospital believed they were victims of government experiments. Being a torture test subject myself, I have to believe them. It is an epidemic so well concealed by mass programming. I would not have believed what I am saying just 2 years ago. I had a friend about 5 years ago that began to become paranoid and believed that government agents followed him and an ex-boss was paying people to stalk him. This is the typical script as documented in several CIA programs released through the Freedom of Information Act. I assumed he became paranoid schizophrenic, and like what many people do, I wanted to distance myself from him. So one day when he emailed me, I copied the logo of the NSA off of their website and sent a message back to him saying that this account has been confiscated by the NSA as a joke to make him more paranoid. Bad karma. Who knew that several years later it would happen to me? I had another friend who went to Harvard and then Wharton Business School who participated in a government program that injected some sort of radiation into him for a brain imaging study. He needed the money to pay for college. The radiation was not supposed to be that damaging. Several years later, we thought he lost his mind. He said he spoke to God, and in 1 week changed from an outgoing lascivious type, to a hardcore born-again Christian. My friends and I thought that he lost his mind. Now, it has happened to me. Our group has dwindled as each of us gets picked off as the years progress. I can explain what happened to my friends now in scientific, historical, and current political terms. So, reader, if you think my account is an isolated event and you don't feel like you should do anything, it is merely a matter of time. This is how Nazi Germany went as far as they did. Everyone stood by in disbelief as they heard the accounts of the evil deeds, and because of the incredible mass scale and excessive brutality, people were unable to accept the accounts as being completely true. The same strategy is being used again, but by the United States on its own people. No one will stand up, believe, or even think about that the taboo topic of mental illness might be a cover-up, just like how the government used what they called retarded children in their radiation experiments for 30+ years. I believe that the term radiation has been purposefully confused in much of the literature. The word radiation is used to describe two different kinds of energy release. Classical use of the word radiation means that an alpha particle was released like from uranium. But an acceptable use of the word means electromagnetic radiation, which is just photonic energy, that is directed energy radar. These are possibly more word games and brand confusion techniques of the traitors conducting informational warfare. Propaganda, word games. The United States military leader in an article called, "The Mind Has No Firewall," coined a term called psychoterrorism. It means terrorizing citizens with psychotronic weapons. Guess what they are doing to thousands of Americans and others in NATO countries? It is nothing less than federally sponsored terrorism. They prefer to call it weapons testing though. Precise language is important in communicating ideas, and more importantly, it reveals how the communicator changes language for their intention. The word terrorism is a perfect example. Break down what this marketing term means. It means guerrilla warfare and to terrify the populace. How do you distinguish it from normal guerrilla warfare? Is trying to destroy the Pentagon and hurt the financial center at ground zero really terrorism, or just very strategic targets to take out your enemy? Who benefits from the population being frightened? Paranoia favors government in rallying the people's support for a fight. It does not favor the other side. They could have killed more people by going to a football stadium with machine guns at the exits. They are trying to stop a system, not kill the citizens, just as we are in Iraq. The word was coined as propaganda by those that are most threatened in order to garnish support for their cause. Another phrase that has more meaning now than it did when it was coined is living the American dream. We are allowed to create a myopic worldview for ourselves. We can be sheltered from knowing or caring about the hardships of the rest of the world. We don't even have to care about our neighbors anymore. Selfishness and the me generation currently rule. The mass news media and Hollywood will help create the American delusion for you. You can live in happy bliss ignorant of politics, corruption, and other pesky concerns. Replace the bigger questions and concerns with the immediate ones, like where is the nearest Starbucks and when do I get a raise? How I reminisce about the simple life, and on occasion I wish I could be reinserted into the matrix, the American delusion. But I carry the burden of knowledge, and with that responsibility to educate and motivate the 300 million people into action, a force that is unstoppable if they would just be told the God's honest truth about the secrets which the Pentagon holds from them in both technology and strategy. The populace would have a very different opinion than what is fashionable now if they knew and believed the truth of the larger picture. What I would like to clarify is the vocabulary surrounding this relatively new breed of weapon called EEG heterodyning. It has so many misnomers and misdirections surrounding it in literature. In an effort to confuse the public, the EEG heterodyning weapon goes under many names: non-lethal weapons, soft kill weapons, silent kill weapons, directed energy, bioelectromagnetic weapon, psychic warfare, psi weapons, psychotronics, neurological weapons, neuralizer, nervous system disruptors, electronic weapons, EEG cloning, mind melding, ionospheric heaters, over-the-horizon radar, continental ballistic missile defense, and the list goes on. A constantly changing vocabulary around this weapons system has confused the topic to the point of non-discussion. Genius or insanity? Throughout history, geniuses have often been misclassified as insane. Galileo was wrong for 300 years according to the Church. Since I have been told by non-government experiment victims that I am like Nash from The Beautiful Mind, I must address this topic directly. We need to more precisely define insanity to understand what it means. Most often it is simply a word to describe an inability to understand an individual's behavior and their speech due to context. Contextualism is of utmost importance when understanding concepts or people. The description of insanity is a cop-out. Most precisely defined, the word insane or mental illness should mean erroneous thinking. Erroneous thinking can only be judged in the framework of logic and mathematics. It should not be judged as psychology would have it, in the context on common acceptable ideas. Delusion and errors of thought must be demonstrated through the framework of truth that has endured the test of time. While many of the government torture test victims show an amplification of neuronal pathways in the front temporal lobes, we should not discount their testimony based on this. Errors of thought are amplified with Satan, silent assassination through amplification of neurons. In order to separate out what is true and what are just perceptual errors, you need to study a victim's testimony from the viewpoint that you already know about how these weapons work. It becomes quite apparent how each person interprets the alien experience of having their mind messed with differently. What if we had a National Truth Day? I'll break my staff. Bury it certain fathoms in the earth. And, deeper than did ever plummets sound. I'll drown my book. The Tempest, 5. 1. Imagine how strange it would be if we had one day where everyone had to tell the truth. The news might go like this. This is the 6 o'clock news on Truth Day. Today government officials fed radiation to hundreds of people while posing as cafeteria workers to test the long-term carcinogenic effects from radiation. 3 more people have been grabbed for the ultra torture and mind control experiments and practice assassinations. One of the victims was a whistleblower and was successfully killed right away in a car crash. The government denies that there is any connection between whistleblowing and the selection of this target. They say that they do everything fairly and they randomly select people to torture and kill for their data and practice. Also, 500 Navy officers were exposed to extremely high levels of electromagnetic energy unbeknownst to them during another experiment. We are not allowed to release who was exposed because they will be upset if they found out. One soldier was wounded in Iraq today because his buddy accidentally shot him while playing with his gun. The final numbers have been retallied for Desert Storm, and yes, we killed more of our own allies than the Iraqis, but it was close. Yet another strange story of government experimentation is giving methamphetamines, or energy drinks, to fighter pilots before their missions. Aren't drugs banned in the military? I wonder how the don't ask don't tell policy is holding up on Truth Day. The last story of today is to answer the question, can the government read brain activity at a distance? As it turns out, they have had this capability since 1960, and they claim it is all nice and legal-like when asked to comment. And finally, when Porter Goss was interviewed at a press conference and asked if the CIA uses torture on Iraqis in order for the United States to free Iraqis from a torturing dictator, he stated, "No, we creatively interpret laws and redefine words. We also strip away the CIA agent's title during the torture process to make sure it is all legal." This news station and the reporters have all been indirectly threatened that if we have any more truth days we will suffer in our own private psychotronic purgatories. So this will be the last broadcast that we tell it like it is. Thank you and have a good evening, America. Strategic deception and purging the erroneous. Error propagation can not only be achieved through mnemonic warfare, social engineering, but also direct electromagnetic entrainment and programming of brains. These purposeful errors of understanding and thought are extremely detrimental to the global distributed intelligence of the geopsyche. Only through truth unbridled by ego shall mankind achieve harmony with itself and our place in the universe. Purposeful error propagation leads to suboptimal decision-making in chaotically unpredictable ways that harms everyone on the planet. This is the mission of the CIA, Psychological Operations, Information Warfare Unit, INSCOM, and many others division that practice strategic deception. They need to be eradicated for the good of the country and planet, for they too are programmed and influenced by the very errors they create in the self-fulfilling spiral of self-destruction. These agencies are a tool that have turned on the tool users and makers. Part of the disinformation campaign for mind control victims. When one becomes part of the TAMI network, one naturally goes to the internet for information. I found many documents in the military information warfare strategy that talk about how to lead the enemy down fruitless paths of research with slightly erroneous logic that leads to an endless maze of false assumptions and deductions. This is part of the strategic deception initiatives launched on the American people. This disinformation warfare has confused and stupefied many people, helping them sound crazy about the science behind their predicament. Colonel Thomas Bearding is the perfect example of this initiative. He invented the concept of scalar waves and weapons that he warns the Russians possess and the United States scientists know nothing about. He talks about weather and earthquake weapons and zero-point energy. He has a good education in physics, so I can't come to any other conclusion than he is a disinformation agent or a victim of menticide. All his theories are so purposefully skewed. Since he talks about mind control and then discusses all these ridiculous scientific ideas about free energy, faster than light information propagation, and electromagnetic vortexes, the mere idea of mind control weapons is also put into question. This is the classic method of discrediting a topic. Disinformation streams.